Good morning and welcome. I'd like to call this meeting to order and begin with the roll call beginning on my far right.
Johnston here.
Damrow here.
Fiorini here.
Eisenberg here.
We have a quorum, and I understand Councilwoman Tatayan is tied up on a parking lot called I-80 this morning, and she's on her way, so we'll be here when she can get here. And we're not sure about Supervisor Ruthstaller, maybe some San Joaquin County roads issues that have prevented him from being here, but we expect to have 6 soon. File item number 3, the chair's report. Just briefly, a few things to report. One, anticipating some of the presentations that we will hear today, I just want to offer my congratulations to the science folks. The Interim Science Action Agenda will be presented today. They've been working very diligently on that. It's an on-time delivery for the Council's review, and we're very pleased with the work that they've done. On the Levee investment strategy, I've been involved with several outreach meetings. We've launched the project with outreach meetings, and now today we'll be reviewing the issues paper. Staff and the team is working very, very hard. This is a big project. Everyone's taking it very seriously. The outreach programs have, in the meetings that we've conducted with stakeholders and interested parties and experts, is going very well. We're receiving a lot of good information on this issue, and look forward to the staff report during today's meeting. We've had recently 2 presentations. I've had the opportunity to meet with the Bay Delta Committee at the Metropolitan Water Agency of Southern California, and yesterday with the Friends of the San Francisco Estuary at a conference they held in Antioch. Thank you. I've used both of those opportunities to highlight our 5 priorities: flows, land use, levees, the Interim Science Action Agenda, and I always forget the 5th one. Oh, habitat. The habitat restoration I always refer to as the most difficult to do. It's obviously the most difficult for me to remember. I've added a 6th priority because we want to take credit for things that go well. Our 6th priority is to stimulate rain, so we've accomplished that at least in part today, so we're grateful for that. And finally, as promised, you have for you a written report from the trip that several of us took to Boise, Idaho last month to attend a water conference and observe the proceedings surrounding the largest adjudication of water rights in the West. Hopefully you'll find the report interesting. There are written reports for the audience on the table outside. This will be posted on our website tomorrow, and we'll be circulating it to the folks that we think have an interest in this issue. So with that, we have a question.
I took a fast look at this when you distributed it this morning, Randy, and it is one of the most interesting memos around. Refresh my memory again. How many water right claims were involved in this, if you recall?
156,000 ground and surface water rights to be adjudicated.
I mean, it is probably the best indication that if you ever want to deal, if California ever wants to deal with the inchoate claims, the claims that are made without necessarily quantifying what that is, Idaho at least took a major step for most of the state, and after a very long time and a lot of money, actually seems to have resolved the issue. Yeah, this is very helpful.
Good, and it was great to have Dr. Goodwin with us as part of that team with his knowledge of Idaho, and Peter contributed greatly to this report to help make sure that we highlighted the key lessons to be learned from there. Let the record show that Councilmember Ruthstaller has joined us. Thank you. I did not get your message, but you're here. That's the good news. Okay, on to file item number 4, the Executive Officer's Report. Jessica?
Thank you, Randy. Good morning. I'll start by going over the day's agenda. We'll be focusing quite a bit on science today and then ending on our levee discussion. So we'll start with our regular update from our lead scientist, Dr. Goodwin, and then we'll move into an update from a member of the Independent Science Board who's here with us today from Berkeley, Dr. Vince Resch. Then staff will provide a preview of the upcoming Delta Science Conference, which is October 28th to 30th, and you'll find a brochure for that conference, which was just released in front of you. I believe there are others on the table outside, and it's available on our website. That will be followed by a presentation on the draft Interim Science Action Agenda, which Randy mentioned, and is now out for public comment. Finally, today we will ask you to consider, or not finally actually, the next after the Science Action Agenda, we will ask you to consider the addition of another federal agency member to our Interagency Implementation Committee. It's the U.S. Geological Survey, and you will have the opportunity to hear from a representative about the work that they do in the Delta. This meeting will also feature your first opportunity since we launched the Delta Levee Investment Strategy project to really delve into the policy questions that we face in tackling the assignment that the legislature gave us to recommend state priorities for investments in Delta levees. This will take place in the context of a presentation from our staff of our draft issue paper, and I'm really looking forward to that discussion. Since the legislative year ended at the end of August, I wanted to hit on some of the highlights that relate to the Delta and to the Delta plan. No doubt you've heard about the groundwater legislation that was signed by the governor last week. It's a 3-bill package that requires the development and submittal of local groundwater plans in areas identified at high risk for overdraft, medium or high priority basins. The controversial aspect, of course, is that the bills also clarify the state's role, the state board and DWR, in engaging if local entities are not meeting the requirements of law in the time schedule allotted. The Delta Plan, as you may recall, included several recommendations related to groundwater management, including recommendations that areas that receive water from the Delta watershed and areas overlying basins in critical condition of overdraft should submit groundwater management plans, which until this legislation were voluntary or were simply a condition of state funding. This legislative package, therefore, really goes quite far in satisfying some of those Delta Plan recommendations. The legislature also passed a small group of bills which modify requirements for the content and submittal of local urban water management plans. A few of the bill's provisions relate indirectly to Delta Plan policies and recommendations, and mostly in the fact that they will yield new and additional up-to-date water use information and a greater understanding of the conservation actions that are both planned and being currently undertaken in local areas. Specifically, the bills require new reporting on a revised and modern set of demand management measures or conservation actions. Originally, the law had 14 that were articulated in statute, and many recognized that those were a bit out of date, needed to be updated. In 2007, the legislature asked for a technical panel to be formed, and that technical panel was charged with recommending updates to the law. So the bill package that we saw go through this year modified the 14 demand management measures, updating them, and also will require electronic reporting of information in urban water management plans, which is an issue that we discussed during the development of the Delta Plan. And it requires new urban water management plans to report on system water loss, essentially performing a water audit, as system water loss leakage is estimated to be as high as 10% in some urban systems. So staff are further digesting these bills and will be engaging with DWR as these matters move forward. I reported previously on the revised water bond, which is set for the November ballot, which if passed also contains funding for several Delta Plan priorities, including storage, improved local water planning, groundwater plans, Delta restoration, and more. A recent PPIC poll reported earlier this week shows that in a survey, there's a favorable response to the water bond, with about 6 in 10 leaning towards a yes vote. There was good news recently, kind of in the Delta as Place category. There was a small celebration last week for the completion of the first phase of rehabilitation work on Isleton's historic Bing Kong Tong building, which is a historic Chinese cultural center. It was a $600,000 project started in February to help stabilize the building. And the Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency provided the bulk of Phase 1 funding, with the rest coming from a California Cultural Endowment grant. The building was rebuilt after a 1926 fire in Isleton and was once the focal point for a thriving Chinese community in Isleton. And if you Google it online, it's really interesting to kind of see the before and after pictures. So finally, on a personal note, I'm going to begin maternity leave on October 13th, and I will be out of the office or on a reduced work schedule until March 1st. During my absence, Dan Ray will serve as acting executive officer and will be working closely with Randy. I'll also be in touch on certain priority issues. So that's it for my report. Thank you.
Any questions of Jessica? No? Okay. Thank you, Jessica. Next item.
Next item is our legal update.
Yes,
Yes,
file
you
item
can.
4B.
Well,
Proceed.
thank you very much. I appreciate it. And before I started the legal update, I too wanted to echo Phil's comments. I had not seen this report yet, and you and I had chatted a couple times about the trip that you took, and it's really interesting. So I'd highly recommend taking a quick look at this. And you and I had also chatted about the fact that Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia would be at the conference, and you have a nice little picture with a caption, his opinion about adjudication and how it leads to certainty. And so, but this is really a really well done synopsis. So thank you for that.
Well, I want to give Keith Coolidge credit for the graphics.
Yeah, it's very nice. So it does us credit as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
So for the legal update, as you know, periodically we ask our legal intern to come up and give you an update of things that are going on Delta related that aren't necessarily focused on Delta plan litigation. Just wanted to give you a brief update on Delta plan litigation, though. The opening briefs in the 7 coordinated cases are due October 15th. So it's coming up in a couple weeks, and so my focus and our litigation team's focus will shift rather dramatically to reading the opening briefs and preparing our defense. Our opposition briefs are due April 6th of 2015, but I'll give you periodic updates and apprise you as appropriate. So with that, I'd like to introduce our current legal intern, Cody Phillips, whom you had a chance to meet, I believe, at your field trip and your last meeting. I was unfortunately not able to attend, but I'd like to call him up to the table, as well as Kayvon Samsam, who accompanied Cody to a workshop yesterday, and hopefully they can give you a little context and a little update. I have to let you in on a little secret here. I decided, since Cody's kind of new to California water, so I figured that I would introduce him to a completely non-controversial, novel, new issue that has no history. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cody, and he and Kayvon can give you some kind of context of what they heard yesterday.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. So yesterday I attended a workshop with Mr. Samsam, and it was entitled Central and Southern Delta Water Availability and Use. And it addressed allegations of illegal in-Delta water diversions. It went from about 12 to 4, and it was held in the EPA building. Now, you may remember that the Delta Water Master, Craig Wilson, reported to you on March 15th about a similar issue. This is in 2012, relating to illegal in Delta water diversions. That was for a strategic work plan to address beneficial uses and in the Delta and to settle pre-1914 and riparian water rights. The issue which was addressed yesterday at this workshop was similar in that it addressed illegal water diversions, but it was brought up in a different context. And I'll set that up. And so on July 2nd of this year, State Water Board adopted resolution number 2014-0031 to adopt an emergency regulation for statewide drought-related curtailment of water diversion to protect senior water rights. This resolution adopted California Code of Regulations Section 879, which allows the Deputy Director for Water Rights to issue an order requiring pre-1914 and/or riparian diverters to provide supporting information on their basis of right, and that is if a complaint or information describing unlawful diversion is received. So subsequent to that, July 23rd, the California Department of Water Resources and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation filed a complaint pursuant to these emergency regulations. In response, the State Water Board released a proposed draft order to start the conversation about how to solve the diversion issue. The draft order would have required in Delta pre-1914 and riparian users to provide detailed usage information within 5 days of receipt of the order. The DWR/reclamation letter and the draft order prompted responses in the form of 2 letters in support and 6 letters in opposition, and ultimately in the decision to hold this workshop. So the State Water Resources Control Board held this public workshop yesterday to receive comments and discuss the most effective process available to the State Water Resources Control Board to determine the facts pertaining to water availability and water diversion and use in the central and southern Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. So I'll just tell you a little bit about how the workshop itself went. It was an opportunity to hear everyone's positions that were laid out in front of the board via these public comments. At the outset, the board made it very clear that there would be no formal action taken, and that or at least yesterday, and the intent of the workshop was to identify the best available process of handling the water rights to the board. There was a brief introduction by their counsel to the board for the workshop, which set up a brief history, which was basically what I just set out. It talked about the emergency regs, the letter sent by DWR and the Bureau of Reclamation, and then the posting of the proposed draft order. Additionally, council identified one letter in particular by the Sports Fishing Alliance as a separate complaint altogether, and they would not be addressing it. The reason is because this complaint contained, this comment actually contained a complaint which was alleging that it was actually the Department of Water Resources and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation who were illegally diverting water upstream, not the in-Delta water users. So following the introduction, the chairwoman turned to public comments, which ran for roughly 3.5 hours from 12 to 3:30. The public comments were in large part a reflection of and reiteration of the letters that each party had submitted. And there were some commenters who were individuals and had not necessarily submitted a letter beforehand. Those who supported the draft order, which were Kern County, Westlands, and state water contractors, presented themselves as a panel instead of going up individually. And DWR and Bureau of Reclamation presented their comments in a similar manner. The consensus seemed to be from all parties that 5 days was an untenably short period of time to produce the kind of information that the board would be requesting. Additionally, there was some discussion of the science behind where the user's water comes from. And at the end of the comment segment, our Delta Water Master, Craig Wilson, was asked to give a brief report on his thoughts of what had happened. So finally, the chairwoman, after all the public comments, stated that the next stage in the process would be a strategic internal thinking period, and that the board wants to develop options to lead them out of this issue based on what they found out yesterday. We will be monitoring this issue as the Water Board weighs their options on what to do next. So thank you for your time.
What was that called? The strategic thinking?
A strategic thinking period.
Okay. Question?
This sounds remarkably like a situation where various warring parties accuse the other of evil actions in the hopes that they would be punished, the other party would be punished, and the accusing party would be praised, which sounds an awful lot like Mr. Fiorini's report on the Idaho situation, which ultimately led to an adjudication of, if not all, substantially water right claims in Idaho. Did you get any indication of what the Water Board is thinking about doing with the counterclaims about alleged illegal actions by state and federal officials and water contractors?
The Water Board did not show their hand, so to speak, in any one direction. That's not the feeling I got anyway. I will say that in the letters that were submitted, both for and against the DWR letter, there was mention of adjudication. There were some suggestions by those, certainly those who are in opposition to what DWR had set out. They were leaning towards an adjudication, and again, the Water Board didn't say one way or another, but there were mentions of certainly evidentiary proceedings, which may lead to adjudicatory proceedings.
But this hearing process was focused only on the Department of Water Resources and Bureau of Reclamation assertion of in-delta water use. It would be ironic if they did not apply the same standards statewide. I'm in favor of everybody telling publicly how much water they use wherever they're located. All right, thank you very much.
Kayvon, did you want to add anything?
No, I think Cody did a great job.
Yeah, okay, that's me too. I just wanted to add one other thing that Kayvon and Cody both brought to my attention. One of the gentlemen that did participate in the public comment period was a previous intern here for this body, Curtis Keller, who's now, I guess, representing San Joaquin County as special counsel. Is that, or one of the stakeholders, and apparently he did a fantastic job as well. So I just wanted you to know that.
Good training. I'm curious, was there any discussion about the role of the water master in resolving these kinds of disputes?
There wasn't, not in that capacity. They were very interested in hearing his opinion. He was not prepared to give a report yesterday. He was prompted by one of the council members, or excuse me, board members, to come and give his opinion. And the indication to me, at least, witnessing his testimony, was that they found it very helpful. So, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
What did he say?
Larry?
What did he say?
The Delta Water Master. So he said that it went. His report was this. He said that he felt it went more or less expected, the way the workshop went. He said that the in-Delta users, excuse me, seemed to be wanting to be left alone. He said that the exporters seemed more or less to want to unravel diversion procedures which have been in place since the Spanish were in charge. His opinion is that the answer lies somewhere in the middle between unraveling it all and so he also said that he was intrigued by the concept of satellite imaging to to develop real-time water usage information and statistics. And he also stated the opinion that the individual order process, which has been tossed around, is the wrong way to go because it's an inefficient, and he's been through that as he reported to this council in 2012. And then finally, he did say that conservation and efficiency programs for in-delta users may be an effective tool. So that was the gist of his report.
Okay. Well, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Counselor, anything further? Okay. Jessica, anything further? Okay, thank you all very much. On to file item number 5, approval of USGS as a member of the Delta Plan Interagency Committee. Taran Ravizini.
Good morning,
Good morning.
council members. It's been a while since I've been before you, so thank you very much for letting me present this morning. We have kind of 2 parts to this agenda item. I'd like to first broach the action item, and then we would have an information item following the council's action. So with the chair's permission, I'll begin with the action item. Today, staff is recommending for council consideration adding the United States Geological Survey to the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee membership, the core membership. The addition of USGS to the committee will more fully formalize and strengthen our existing connections with the federal government and in particular with one of its leading science agencies. This action will further the reach of the implementation committee through its core membership to better integrate implementation of not only the governor's California Water Action Plan and federal activities in the Delta with ongoing implementation of the Delta Plan and the Delta Science Plan. As laid out in the staff report, the council has complied with direction of the legislature to establish and convene this committee. In determining the initial composition, which the council did back in December of 2013, the council did take some time and consideration for its composition, and then acknowledged that other agencies may be considered. So that is with the development over the year where we find ourselves today. Currently, the committee has 16 agencies as part of its core membership, 10 state and 6 federal. And the inaugural meeting of that group was on April 9th, as you may remember, and I had reported on that. But during that time, there was a robust discussion over the importance of collaborative science, and particularly in the Delta. And this led to a general consensus of the committee that science tied all of those implementing agencies together, and it should be the highest priority for the committee. So in light of that, working with our Delta Science program and working with the chairman of the committee, I'm here today to recommend adding USGS to the core membership because they do bring, of course, the federal component of science, completing that science realm within the committee membership.
Thank you, Taran. I wholeheartedly support this staff recommendation. This is an action item. Okay, Johnson moves. Eisenberg seconds. Because this is a action item, do we have any public comment? No blue slips. Then any discussion? Then yes.
We've heard USGS people a number of times. We've heard USGS people testify a number of times. Frankly, I think their research is among the best available in a host of areas, and I was trying to find right now, but the latest illustration Maven's Notebook had a post where the USGS had done a webinar update of all the things they'd done to us, about 4 presentations, I believe. Brand new, some additional chart information, some additional time on groundwater and subsidence. And I just think it's first-rate stuff, so I think it's terrific. Also, they are the closest thing, I don't think this is the right word, but of a neutral federal agency, and that's not fair, but I guess an independent agency. They are not a traditional water combatant. You know, they don't run water systems and or do eco stuff, and that gives them, I think, a level of credibility that is much needed.
Okay. Looks like we're ready for the vote. Shall we begin?
Tatai and I.
Fiorini, aye.
Eisenberg, aye.
Very good. Passes unanimously. Taran, you have one more item under file item 5?
Yes, thank you very much. What I'd like to do to now supplement the inclusion of USGS onto the core membership would be to invite Deputy Regional Director Jeff Kay and Michelle Schaus, who is the Delta Liaison for USGS, up to the table to provide a little background as to what USGS is engaging in the Delta, and to then also answer any questions that the council may have.
Great. Thanks, Taran. Jeff, Michelle, welcome.
Little red button. There you go.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your vote of confidence in us and inviting us to participate in the Implementation Council. We're happy to be a part of this important endeavor. And thank you for the kind words. Phil, it's always nice to hear somebody brag about us. So what we'd like to do is let you know what you just bought off on for a little bit. We'll tell you a little bit about who we are and maybe what we have to offer. So well, I give Taran a lot of credit. She says, you know, we better have you go last because we don't want them to think you're politicking for a spot here, and we don't want to do that. I mean, that's really not what we do. Phil was right on the money. We don't manage anything. We don't regulate any activities. We conduct scientific research and monitoring, and we provide that information to management and regulatory government agencies to make decisions and choices. We help explore and understand what their options are and the implications of those choices. As federal agencies go, we're fairly small. We're only about $1 billion congressional appropriated program, about 10,000 employees scattered across 400 locations in the United States. You can see from that map we have 7 regions, and we are the Pacific region, headquartered here in Sacramento. It includes Nevada, California, and the Pacific Islands. We have 9 science centers in our region. A science center is an organizational construct which guides and directs individual science efforts. 6 of those science centers are headquartered in California, scattered across 39 different locations in the state, and they have expertise in a variety of ecological areas: water, groundwater, surface water, water quality, water flow, modeling. We do earthquake monitoring and we try to analyze and understand earthquake risk, earthquake probabilities. We do we investigate the availability of minerals. We do energy research. We do geologic mapping to understand the substrate underneath us. We have a coastal marine science program that looks at the effects of coastal hazards like tsunamis and winter storms, coastal erosion issues, sediment transport and deposition issues. We do ecological studies to understand invasive and endangered species and habitats, and geography. We have a geography component that takes our science and connects it more directly to human implications. In tsunami areas up in Washington and Oregon, what are the evacuation implications for the humans that live along the coast, and how do we best accommodate that, things like that. In the Delta, right now, we have over 100 research and monitoring projects going on that are totaling over $17 million. Most of that funding comes from partner government agencies, state and federal agencies that are interested in us helping them to do different types of research. We have our 6 science centers are all engaged in the Delta, plus we bring in a couple of science centers from outside of the region to assist us. Those 8 science center directors, the leaders of those organizations, work with our regional office to create what we call the USGS Delta Executive Board, which guides, coordinates all of our research efforts. Our history in the Delta, we've been there since the late 1960s working in the Bay. We've done some seminal work in water quality and sewage treatment plant effects and invasive clams, their arrival and implications, what they do to the ecosystem. We study sediment transport and discovered that the Bay is exporting more sediment than it's bringing in, with implications for tidal wetlands and sediment deposition. We've got a hydrologic flow network through the Delta, which allows us to monitor and understand how the water is moving there. Documented that the river, the pumps actually reverse the river flow in old and middle rivers. And some climate change impacts, some pretty significant modeling efforts that look at the effects of climate change and implications on hydrology of the Delta. We joined the Interagency Ecological Program in 1985 and have been active participants since then. We're founding members of the CalFed program. And when the Delta Science Program was created in, was that 2008 or 9, with legislation, why we fund the Delta, the lead scientist. So Peter actually works for us, although you try to take credit for him, I know. But we're happy to support the Delta Science Program with that effort. So let me talk a little bit about what do we mean when we talk about Delta Science. We don't just talk about the work that's done in the Delta itself, and this is kind of a difficult, it took us a while to struggle and talk and sort this out. We're interested in any science that we do that will affect the co-equal goals of the Delta Plan, right? Water reliability or ecosystem health. And so that could be water arriving somewhere in the north or south ends of the watershed, or water that's exported through or what's happening in the Bay. So so any research that we do that's within that watershed that relates to those co-equal goals, we refer to as Delta Science, and so that's the term I'll be using now. There's a lot of work we do in the watershed that doesn't relate, but that's how we're classifying it. That's the nature of the $17 million we're doing. It all directly affects one or both of those co-equal goals. We've kind of organized the rest of this presentation into these 8 societal issues, things that we hope resonate with people so that you can understand, and I have a slide on each one of these, and we'll go through and tell you in a little more detail about the kind of work that we do. We have 500 stream gauges throughout the state of California. Most of those are in that Delta watershed that monitor stream flow. They're critical to the National Weather Service, and they're critical to our understanding and modeling of what's going to happen in the Delta or is happening and potential with storms. We've got over 35 flow stations in the Delta itself that help us understand water movement through the Delta. We monitor water quality in the Delta, and all of the information that we're gathering is used to inform the state and federal water operations. Sediment in the water column is very important for secretive species. It's nutrient-rich substrate that gets deposited on tidal wetlands, we hope. And it carries contaminants, so understanding its sources, how it moves through the system, where it gets deposited is very important. So we've done quite a bit of research on that. There has been environmental contamination, as you're well aware, and we study the sources of mercury and selenium and agricultural pesticides and pharmaceuticals, and again track their movement, sewage treatment effluents, track their movement through the Delta, through the system, and what impacts they have on species, and what factors mobilize them and make them biologically available, which is a concern for all of us. We do quite a bit of research on animal health and status. We track salmon and Delta smelt movements through the Delta. We study the habitat requirements of other endangered species, giant garter snakes and birds. We do quite a bit of work on migratory species that are that are national and international significance that for which the Delta and the Delta ecosystem is extremely critical habitat for them. And we study phytoplankton and other species that are important to the food web. We have an interest in habitat restoration. We've been restoring salt ponds out in the bay for quite some time and have some real interest in the big habitat restoration efforts that are proposed for the Delta. And there are some issues there that we're concerned about and we'd like to explore and help discover, find solutions to. We study natural hazards. We're building geologic maps of the substrate of the Delta. We're trying to understand the faults in the Bay Area and the Delta, the risk of levees, the seismic activity. We led this major arc storm activity that looked at the influence of floods in the Central Valley and their implications for levees. We've looked at subsidence, both in the Delta with the agriculturally induced subsidence. What is it that causes subsidence? How do you reverse subsidence? We're looking at subsidence out in the Central Valley where groundwater pumping's having an influence on the water delivery system. We have hydrologists that are deeply engaged in working with the National Weather Service and looking at atmospheric rivers and hydrologic inputs into the system. We model water availability, water temperature changes, how those will be perpetrated throughout the system. We study sea level rise. And right now, so that covers those societal issues, and as we just try to sum up where we are in the regional office, we are working, our leadership is working to support the Delta Science Plan. We feel like that's a strong partnership for the U.S. Geological Survey and the Delta Science Program to work together. It's a tremendous plan with a great vision and opportunity, and if we can successfully implement it, we can really do a lot of good for the Delta and for the state of California. We're supportive of the Interim Science Action Agenda and anticipate using that as a foundation for us setting priorities for our own research. And we support, we're providing funding and staff support for the State of the Bay Delta report. And our current priorities, we're trying to spearhead some efforts. I talked about habitat issues. You know, if we create the kind of habitat that we need to for the Delta, that it's also good habitat for invasive clams, and if they become established, then they compromise all the investment. Or it's also the habitat that makes mercury bioavailable, and you know, so we're embarking on some efforts to try to explore what can we do about that. Is there a way to build habitat that precludes invasive clams? And so we're poking around and trying to sort out some of those things, doing some pilot studies to see if there's some direction we can go. We're interested in drought, and we're obviously continuing our efforts in natural hazards. Well, that was a whirlwind tour of the U.S. Geological Survey and what we have to offer. We're deeply ingrained in the work here. Our scientists have been engaged for many years. Our leadership is deeply engaged and committed, and we appreciate the opportunity to participate in the Implementation Council and anxious to help in any way that we can.
Thank you, Jeff. Great presentation. Larry, you have a question?
My heart was gladdened when you talked about invasives, but I'd like to talk about weeds. We have a little invasive weed situation, and the USDA ARS folks over in Albany and NASA down in Sunnyvale are heading up a new project, and it seems from what you've just told us that maybe you should send someone over to our next meeting so we can incorporate some of what you're doing.
Well, yeah, they're the experts on the weeds, but yes.
Because
But, yeah, connect me with
and my
with that
comment
meeting.
kind
Let's see what
of
we
got
can do.
this whole thing started back in January when I was shooting my mouth off about the fact that all the great habitat plans will come to naught if we do not take care of the invasive weeds, because all we'll do is have 100,000 acres of invasive weed habitat. So that kind of spurred the USDA folks, and we actually are fully funded and moving forward with an area-wide study on this, and I think you all could be part of that. You should probably also jump in and help the state with their flow study. They seem to be lagging in that area.
Judge?
Yes, I'm surprised. This is the first time we've heard from these folks. You seem to be right in our wheelhouse here for the most part. And,
Silent partners.
no, you haven't silent, that's for sure, but I'm glad you're here. I'm just wondering, we're taking up the levee issue later on today. And I'm looking at a map here with a trench site and the natural hazards that would obviously, these Bay Delta faults would affect levees without question. Are we going to, I know that we have a question related to risks related to levees. Are we going to get in, is there a connection between what the USGS is doing with respect to hazards and levees? Is there interaction there?
There will be.
I mean, it seems to
There
me that's
has
pretty
been.
critical, but I don't know. So if it is, that's terrific, because we're going to be talking about levees, and it strikes me that if we've got those kinds of issues, we should at least have a basic understanding of what the risks are.
There's a very significant relationship between earthquake hazards and levee stability.
I would think so,
We have
yeah.
a scientist that's been funded right now to monitor some of the levee deformation. How are the levees changing in their height and shape over, since 2007, I guess. So in the last 7 years, what's happening to them? Are they changing? And our efforts to understand the geologic substrate in the delta and the risk. I mean, it's not just the earthquakes in the delta, but the earthquakes in the Bay Area, the Hayward Fault, a significant rupture there could easily create liquefaction in the delta and be hazardous. And you had a presentation from our earthquake specialists, was that 2 years ago? And if there's a need, we can certainly have them come back and speak some more on this topic.
Well, I just think that connection is critical as we discuss the levees. I'm happy to hear this effort on the part of the USGS. I think that's a fairly close connection between what we're going to be talking about later today, which I know very little, except what I read in the report. So I think it'd be helpful to have that more expansive maybe discussion at some point.
Yes.
Thank you.
Patrick?
Typically, your people operate as part of a team on some of these complicated policy issues with action plans needed and maybe happening. You're never the lead then, right? Because you're not a manager of a project. Is that right?
We are.
I mean, you might be on a research
We are the
project, but-
managers of research projects.
Correct.
And we will be the
Right.
lead on research projects, often at the direction or request of the management agency.
Right. So whether you took flood control, seismic, or weed abatement, or you said that's not particularly yours, but clams or any of the many issues on that, since at times you're in a room with other federal agencies as well as potentially local and state agencies, do you have to get your recommendations or analysis cleared by anybody before you present them?
We have an internal review policy for our research. So before we release any scientific findings, it goes through this process to ensure that we always all of our products are peer reviewed before they're released, to make sure there's
Right.
objectivity. That
I guess just
Is that-
hypothetically, there's a direction set by the federal government or a federal agency that's the lead, or something that there is already a substantial commitment by the federal government in some direction, say with regard to the Central Valley Project or anything else. And you're doing research, and the effect of that research potentially is to hamstring or put in conflict or slow or change or otherwise
Or find new solutions.
yes, sort of make it more difficult for your sister agencies or your bosses to pursue what they've already identified as their course of action? What happens?
It's never our objective to be a problem for our sister agencies. Oftentimes, you know, what really happens is if science is brought into a management issue late in the game, then often that's what happens, is we end up finding out things that you really didn't want to hear, that you headed down the wrong path. But if science is brought in early and we're able to gather information, we can often help guide you towards solutions that are more win-win than becoming problematic. I'm not sure that I'm heading where you want to go here. If that addresses your question,
that's
Patrick.
pretty good. But I mean, the credibility of science always is that you call them as you see them.
That's right.
And if the suspicion arises that recommendations are tailored to achieve some other result, or suppressing of information because it didn't fit whatever the agreed upon priority was, then over time that would undermine you, but it also would make it more difficult, presumably, to do things that are science grounded.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that's why we have policies in place that prevent that kind of influence on our science. That's why we're really happy as a science agency to not manage or regulate anything. We have none of those biases or influences, so we are free to speak, with what our findings are.
Any other questions of Jeff or Michelle? Jeff, Michelle, thank you very much. Welcome aboard. We look forward to seeing you on November 17th at the next Implementation Committee meeting.
We'll be there. Thank you very much.
And look forward to your help on our Levee investment strategy project as well. Okay, on to file item number 6, the lead scientist report. Dr. Goodwin.
So in the lead scientist report this morning, I'm just going to touch on 3 issues, but I can't resist just adding to that discussion on the USGS. I think that the USGS really is the gold standard globally for data quality, and I'm going to be talking about the Data Summit. But the procedures and methodologies that they pioneer and put in place truly are used in many, many countries of the world. And some of those data collection that were mentioned there is extraordinarily difficult to do. Something that seems very simple, the delta network that is absolutely essential when you're modeling flow through the delta, probably the most fundamental thing that we're faced with. Imagine accurately recording water surface elevation in an area that's subsiding rapidly. And in some places it's subsiding more quickly. And so that network that the USGS have put in place, it started out as a piecemeal. Now it's one of the cornerstones of much of the science that will come before you. It is absolutely critical, and I think it also shows that long-term commitment that a science agency can bring to the table. When they started doing that, it wasn't seen as being fashionable or perhaps the most highest priority. Now it's viewed as absolutely essential to understanding how the system is responding. So with that as a preface, we wanted to give you an update on the Data Summit. If you recall, in June the 5th and 6th, at the beginning of the summer, we hosted a Data Summit. This was called for in the Delta Science Plan and was one of 3 high priority actions where we really felt it was necessary to get the broad science community together. There were over 1,300 people participated in that webcast from 8 different countries, as well as packing out the UC Davis Conference Center. And some of the thinking on this was perhaps a little ahead of its time. Since the initial planning and the science plan was put together, there's obviously just a huge interest in data, particularly under the moniker of big data. And in the last year, we've seen executive orders from the president, emergence of regional data centers for climate science and things like that. So this is really important, and why there's so much attention being focused on this is because our ability to absorb this accelerating data streams and the availability of data is somewhat limited. But if we can start channeling these data streams, we're going to accelerate knowledge discovery first of all, but also make data usable and accessible to managers, the folks who are actually making decisions, like in the drought right now. And perhaps just to give one example, I'd like to pick up on Councilman Roostaller's comment about the aquatic vegetation or weeds. Here there's some great work being done by NASA Ames using state-of-the-art remote sensing. And they're conducting aerial surveys. They're working with ARS who are out on the ground actually measuring aquatic vegetation, but they're not the only agency or group out there monitoring that type of thing. So there's at least 2 other management agencies there also doing surveys. If that information was readily available, it might help guide their sampling protocols. Where do you really need to connect? And then there's the academic community out there. There's maybe a professor out there at UC Davis who's studying this problem with funding source totally outside the Delta, and no one is aware of what's going on. And so it often takes weeks and months to access all the data and to find out what's going on. And Sam Harrider, who you're going to hear from a little later, one of the quotes that he said recently is that probably the most commonly stated words that he hears at the conference is, "Oh, I didn't know you were doing that." And so if we have to keep waiting for conferences, can we use, in this era of big data, making accessible to folks and so people know what's going on without the face-to-face meetings? So imagine a future where the technical term is web services, but imagine you go online and you have an interest, maybe aquatic vegetation or aquatic weeds, and then automatically there's some software that will go out, it's a web crawler, it will go out, look out across different data sites, and then come back with a list that categorize, here are the data sources, here's what's going on right now. And then maybe you click down on the list and it says, what information do you want collected? And it automatically goes out to those various websites, downloads the information in the form of maps or tables or files that you can use for your particular management. And so that's just one aspect, but then maybe you're trying to understand and predict, and nutrients is obviously a big driver associated with aquatic vegetation. So being able to use tools like this to understand who's collecting the data on nutrients and download that information. But nutrients aren't static, the flows are moving around. There's many different modeling efforts, so also being able to use this to download information about the flows either in the future or in the past or for different scenarios. And so suddenly you're pulling together very different data streams in order to make rapid decisions and to display it. So what we're looking for is fast and easy access to the relevant data, understanding the quality of that data, being able to display it, and rapidly put it in a format where it can be used. So that's where we're trying to go with this. The status of the report right now, and there's many, many people, and I won't take the time now, but we'll come back later in the year with a full list of acknowledgements, but particularly Tony Hale and George Isaac, who've been the lead writers coordinating all of the inputs from the authors. Shakura at the Delta Conservancy and many, many others have contributed. So we have a solid early draft, but as you can imagine from multiple different writers, probably 40 or 50, it's been a real task to get it concise. With this draft, we're going out to national and international leaders who've been working on these issues. Are we really at the cutting edge with this report? Have we hit the mark? And perhaps more importantly, through the summit organizing committee supplemented with other folks, we're also reaching out to users and agencies that are representative of folks working in our system. So the outcome of this white paper is going to be an expression of the needs of managers and researchers and how we can use these enabling technologies to work together more efficiently in the future. And I really can't stress this strongly enough. We firmly believe that the Bay Delta can and should be at the leading edge of big environmental data management. We've got Silicon Valley down the road. You've got 6 of the top 20 universities. Many of those have huge research programs in data management, so, as well as the huge investments by the state and federal agencies working in this field. So we think that this can be a model in the environmental data management of the future. So I'll stop there. I don't know if there's any other comments. You'll be seeing the full draft later in the year, and we hope to have it wrapped up by the end of the year, so the various agencies, university folks can actually use this as a guiding document for pursuing funding to implement some of these activities.
Any big data questions? Nope. On to the next item.
I don't know if Vice Chair Eisenberg has anything after the Exceed conference to make sure we're on task. I do.
It's just my normal observation that the importance for public policy of good data is clear, but I'm convinced after we attended the conference in Atlanta that the public policy uses of data are not necessarily the drivers of the discussion for those who are data accumulators and evaluators. And, you pick up all the information that's there and people pursue their own research interest, which is not the same thing as making research accessible for either policymakers or the public. And to me, that's going to be an ongoing problem.
Right.
Yeah.
We certainly hope this white paper will begin to get that, because Vice Chair Eisenberg certainly created some interesting discussion at the conference with those observations. The second item here is the Council had requested a regular update on El Nino. As you can see in the brief description here, what looked at the beginning of the year as setting up to be a really exceptional El Nino year with expected wet conditions along much of the western seaboard. Gradually over the last few months that's been dissipating dramatically. So the last time I reported to you, that signal is now becoming so weak that in the climate prediction and the weather prediction models, that forcing is so weak that it could be going in either direction. So in this report, we included the link for those people who are listening in to a really nice public information document put out by the NOAA RISA program. And what they're pointing out there is that, one, it seems very unlikely this year that there will be a strong El Nino, but also in some of the documentation there, they're pointing out that in California we rely so much on over-year storage that even a really wet year is unlikely to get us out of the drought completely unless it was truly an exceptional year, which doesn't seem to be in the cards right now. So we'll keep you updated on this and other valuable sources as the year goes on. Are there any questions on that? If not, I'd like to introduce our newest science fellow want-to-be.
That's Sam?
Yeah, so Sam Howard is going to give the numbers update and be doing what he really wants to be doing rather than administration. So Sam.
All right. Sam Harrider, I'm a program manager actually with the Delta Science program, although, you know, it's kind of fun digging into the numbers, I have to admit. And also helps me to think about giving direction when our next fellow or staff person comes on board to do this. So I'm going to highlight a couple of things, maybe update a couple of numbers here and by the numbers. Water storage in the reservoirs is not much different than it was last time. It's Shasta is still falling. It's right around 43% of average right now, and getting kind of perilously close to record low storage. So, and I wanted to give a little look into the future. Shasta normally falls clear through November, December time period, even maybe a little later than that. So we can expect to still, even with the current rain, expect to see it dropping for another couple of months. Oroville Reservoir has actually leveled off a little bit. It's about 49% of average for this time of year. It looks like it's going to hold there, and with some rain, it may start rising before the end of the year. San Luis Reservoir is actually rising right now. They're actually putting water into San Luis. It's being stored for next year's needs, and so the water that's being moved through the delta right now is being accumulated, and some accumulation in San Luis, even though it is much below where it typically is this time of year. Let's see, river flows. Sacramento River has dropped a little bit, although it's holding fairly steady. I actually went back and looked at the 20-year averages for the Sacramento River for September, and it's running about half of what it typically does this time of year. Its 20-year average is about 16,000 cubic feet per second. It's running about 8,000 right now. The San Joaquin River at Vernalis is running about close to 400 CFS right now. Its 20-year average is about 2,000, so it's running about 20% of its usual flow for this time of year, so it's quite low. Let's see, precipitation. So we got some rain coming today, and this actually is adding to the total for the 2013-14 water year, which runs through September 30th. So on the books, it's going to look like it's from last year's, even though we know it's really starting this coming year's water season. It'll probably add to the Northern Sierra and maybe a little bit Southern Sierra water total, but probably isn't going to do much to bump them up on the list of the some of the all-time lowest. Northern Sierra is about the 9th out of 94 years, 9th lowest on record, and probably will stay there. Let's see, we threw a number in there for rainfall for Hemet, California on September 7th, and that was rainfall from Hurricane Norbert. They got 3 inches of rain in one day, actually in a couple of hours, and that just happens to be where Metropolitan Water District's Diamond Valley Reservoir is located. I don't know if there's any connection there, but I don't think it really added to their storage, which is actually fairly low. Their reservoir storage is actually still dropping and is quite a bit lower than it normally is for this time of year. Not to be outdone, Crescent City, California, over the last couple of days, got 3.62 inches of rain. So the North Coast got a pretty good dose, and even Shasta Dam got a couple of inches of rain today. So I don't want to make it look like that's going to add to much to alleviate the drought, but it's always a welcome addition. Water quality is pretty similar to what it was last time. The Western Delta locations, Edmonton and Jersey Point, are still pretty salty. The water quality at Banks is holding about the same. San Joaquin River water quality has actually gotten a little bit worse. San Joaquin River Vernalis is now about almost 700 microsiemens per centimeter, which is right up there about the limit. So they may have to release water from, typically they release water from New Melones to meet that standard when it starts dropping down. So when the water quality gets too high. I looked a little bit for some fish numbers, because we usually try to add some of the ecosystem side of things, and this time of year there's really not much coming forward. I talked to our folks our contacts at Fish and Wildlife, California Fish and Wildlife, and they indicate that they'll try to come out with an interim report on delta smelt, the fall midwater trawl index, probably in November. So probably won't be till November, so we start getting a really good look at what's going on with smelt. Although most of the biologists expect that the numbers are going to be quite low again, as they have for the last couple of years. So with that, I think I'll stop unless there's any questions.
We have a question. Larry?
Just one. I read that there was an issue on the ability to maintain the colder temperature in the rivers. Could we add that to this by the numbers? Is there some way to kind of let us know what's going on? Because that kind of affects the fish.
Yeah, we could. I'll have to think about how to do that. You're talking about the cold water pool issues, and that's an issue for a lot of the
The article
reservoirs.
I remember, I didn't read it all, but I glanced at it, and it said that they were unsure that they were able to supply sufficient cold water for this fall run, which kind of
Yeah,
important.
and a lot of that issue is related to Lake Shasta because, and they actually have to maintain cold temperatures throughout the summer for a winter run Chinook salmon. And I know that they are very worried about whether they'll be able to maintain those temperatures throughout the remainder of the season. Actually, we're going to be doing a review, our annual, we call our LOBO, Long-Term Operations Biological Opinions Review, that looks at, that's one of the issues that we'll be looking at. We get a report from the panel, from the team that's working on that temperature issue in the Sacramento River, and we have a independent review panel that looks at that. So I can certainly try to bring some information about that next time. So.
All right, anything else, Sam? Great report. Thank you, Sam. Next item is file item 7, the Delta Independent Science Board report. Pinch hitting for the Independent Science Board, Tracy Collier, is Dr. Vince Resch, a member of the Independent Science Board. Dr. Resch, welcome.
Thank you very much. After watching these on the small screen of my computer,
Nope, Vince. It's right at the base of the, nope, you're.
There you go.
Yeah,
not a very good beginning.
Yeah.
What I was saying was after watching these proceedings on the small screen of my computer for the last several years, where occasionally there was the appearance of a Peter Max poster with various shades of green and orange appearing. It's wonderful to be here and watch these in person. All of you have received a copy of a report of the last 2 minutes, but I want to give some highlights and perhaps expand on some of the points. In June, we spent a lot of time reviewing how we conducted the draft EIR, EIS reviews and what, if we could have found a more efficient or a better way or let's say a more appropriate way of doing it. And after a lot of soul searching about this, we actually were quite pleased with the way it came out with our overall comments. And I think that this will be very appropriate if we are asked to review the revised draft EIR, EIS, and Mr. Stevens has indicated that's a possibility that we may do that. We are hoping, though, that there'll be some type of redlining of the previous document or comments on what's been changed rather than starting from scratch in terms of looking at the whole review. This is one of the things that we're hoping for. Having spent quite a bit of time on the draft EIR, EIS, our work plan had to be revised in terms of the reviews that we're conducting of science in the Delta. We are very pleased with the fact that the Delta Stewardship Council in their habitat issues paper really relied very heavily on our habitat restoration report, which is the first of the reviews that we did. It was very important for us in terms of coming up with a way of doing these reviews efficiently and accurately, and we were very pleased with the outcome of that. And John Weens has made a presentation to the council about this review. But again, we think the habitat issues paper that just came out is quite good, and we're pleased to see the constellation of these two reviews coming together. In terms of current reviews, we are closest or most advanced on one that we're entitling Fish and Flows and Other Stressors. The whole committee has not seen this review. We anticipate it'll be ready in December. The subgroup that's working on it has been working quite hard, and this is one that we know will be very important to the council, and we anticipate that it's making very good progress and that you will see it in the next few months. Another review that is in good progress is a review on how adaptive management is currently being done or is planned to be done by the various agencies working in the Delta. And as you know, this is part of the legislation. What we have done is we have prepared a questionnaire. We are developing a list of contact agencies, basically to first do the questionnaire for an overall picture, but then actually to have individual meetings with some of these agencies. And the idea of the adaptive management review is not just to see what's done and to look for shortcomings, but really look for ways that adaptive management can be improved in the Delta. This is our overall goal with that. We have a third review that is just starting now. This is the one on water quality. It's at its very early stage. We are working on a joint review of the research behind and the agencies behind two topics. One is Delta is placed, and the other is the Delta levees. And of course, the levee investment issue paper that is being discussed today is of extreme importance to us on that. Likewise, we have a water supply review, which is being delayed because of the complexity of some of these other reviews. We have started a review of the interim science plan and science action agenda, excuse me, and we're quite pleased with that, and we're looking forward to the detailed presentation on that. Likewise, we'll be looking at the draft state of the Bay Delta science that's being targeted for early 2015. The other thing, of course, with Dr. Goodwin eventually returning to University of Idaho, we have been working on trying to assist USGS in the search for a new lead scientist. As usual, we had a variety of presentations on science in the Delta. We had a very interesting one on the ecological flows tool that was developed by the Nature Conservancy and on the UC Davis Fish Conservation and Culture Lab and their research efforts. That's kind of a general overview. You have more information in the document, but I'd be pleased to answer any questions. And I thank Dr. Collier for giving me the chance to be here today.
Dr. Esch, great report. You have an ambitious work plan that you are implementing. I could have used your adaptive management review report yesterday. At the San Francisco Friends of the Estuary conference, I was asked to give examples of successful adaptive management programs. And frankly, I couldn't think of any examples to provide, and I felt like that's an area I need to gain more knowledge about.
I'm glad they asked you that question, not me.
Mr. Chairman, you're not giving a fair representation of how you actually handled it. You got a question from the audience that, could you please list the successful adaptive management, what we know about them, so on. You said no. And then there was this long pause before you attempted to qualify that.
As I said, I could really have used the adaptive management report before yesterday's conference. So, any questions of Dr. Esch? Bill?
On the adaptive management stuff, somewhere in the last few days. I've read a typical John Wiens comment about, well, everybody talks about it, but nobody can identify any of the adaptive management being anywhere. Is the science board in a position to simply describe, not the 5,000 ingredients that everyone has to consider, but what it would take in terms of structure? So I'll just tell you what I'm looking for. For major public works projects, whether they are water supply or ecosystem, approximately what % of the total project cost should be devoted to adaptive management? Number two, assume a level of project size, quantified in dollars, $100 million, I don't make it up, about what number of scientific and other advisors should be involved in the evaluation, the review, and the processing of the information and the reporting back. And then number three, how does a good adaptive management system guarantee that the information is actually used? Now, are you guys thinking of taking a crack at that? Because I am frankly amazed at the inability of almost anyone to lay out with clarity anything other than a process to get to some future idea of what adaptive management might look like, when in fact what we need is a scheme that at least is superficially representative of our current best available knowledge so we can get on with this stuff.
That of course, is a very interesting question and very relevant. One of the things when we were doing the habitat restoration review, we found that there are some projects, the very, very small scale restoration projects, say, that are being done by an NGO. There's not a budget for adaptive management. They don't have the time to follow through and evaluate basically whether the restoration was successful. So there's going to be programs that adaptive management really will not be done. One of the things that we found in reviews of adaptive management programs worldwide, and they are really practiced worldwide, is that very often you have the first steps, in that circle that we use, the first steps are done. And very often, due to changes in funding, changes in policy, changes in personnel, that it's not followed through for reasons like that. In terms of % of budget, this is one of the issues that we raised in the Habitat Restoration Report, and we're really we have a very interesting review that was done, a questionnaire that was developed by a group. There's an adaptive management society that basically surveyed their members in terms of their feelings about adaptive management. And part of our questionnaire is in fact based on some of those similar issues. So we can look at how the Delta views adaptive management, how the research in the Delta compared to what we see worldwide. And I think this is going to be very, very useful too. We always have this feeling that Delta is unique, and we really can draw things from other areas, which in fact is one of the principles we're trying to do, is to look at the successes from other areas. To give you a percentage, I don't think we can now. One of the things in the questionnaire that went out by the society was that they tried to talk about that, and the figures ranged from nil to almost the entire budget if they were going to do the full adaptive management. So, there doesn't seem to be a set percentage that can be used.
What happened to that other famous John Wiens comment on best available science? It just has to be good enough.
Yes.
Because there's a point at which the everyone's in favor abstractly of adaptive management. Nobody seems able to describe it except as an endless process to develop a plan that hopefully everybody agrees to. And my frustration is that we can't start anywhere without an articulation of an understandable structure.
Now, Phil, I would argue that we've got an understandable structure of that circle provides us with a basis, of kind of a philosophical basis that we can follow, the 9-step process that's in that.
Yeah, but translate that into budget, personnel, timetable. It's the latter that gives life to a concept. And we can talk about the concept endlessly, but unless we start using it somewhere, I mean, the closest, as you've heard me say before, the closest is the mandatory settlement discussions in the BIOPS litigation. And I'd be perfectly happy if you'd take it on yourself to advise the parties what a perfect or ideal or best current information might suggest system of adaptive management would be. They seem struggling, I think largely because it's a lot easier to talk about the process of reaching a decision than actually reaching a decision.
Yeah. Well, you know, in our review of the BDCP, one of the issues we talked about was budget for adaptive management.
I got that.
That was, you know.
Yeah, but use the John Weens measure and say, based on what we know, it ought to be X, a minimum of X. Because if you don't start somewhere, you don't end anywhere. That's the problem. Okay.
Good conversation. Any other comments or questions of Dr. Resch? Thank you very much for the report and continued success on all the many projects that you have before you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just a heads up, I'm doing some agenda management. We have one of our council members that's going to have to leave early, and I'd really like to tee up the levy investment strategy before we lose a member. So we're working to determine if we can put together the appropriate staff members to staff that. But for now, we'll move on to file item 8, adoption of the August 28th, 2014 meeting summary. What's your pleasure?
Move. Second.
Eisenberg moves, or Staller second. Any discussion? Fiorini, aye.
Eisenberg, aye.
Motion passes unanimously. All right, I think we'll take a 10-minute recess at this time, and we'll pick up either item 11 or item 9 when we return. 10-minute recess. Yes. Unless there's an objection from my colleagues, I would like to step up the agenda to move to file item number 11, which is presentation and discussion of levy investment issue paper. Okay, without objection, that's what we're going to do. And it looks like our lead is Dan, Cindy, and Justin. Dustin. So file item number 11.
There we go. Right. Thank you and good morning. So I am going to go ahead and lead us off with the presentation this morning. And what we'd like to do, this is our monthly update on the Delta Levee investment strategy. And the focus of today's presentation is on the issue paper that staff have drafted. And what I'd like to do is I'll run us through the paper in pretty quick order, and then obviously we'll probably open it up for questions and comments. And once we're done with that piece, I'm going to turn it over to Dustin for just another maybe 5-10 minutes, if that, to go through just some of the other activities we've been doing over the last month related to the levy investment strategy work. So,
good. Sounds like a good approach.
Okay, great. Thank you. So what I'd like to do with the paper, just a couple different things. I'll run through very quickly a brief overview of the paper, remind everybody about the purpose of the paper, talk very quickly about our approach to developing the paper, and then if the council members are okay with this, I'd like to very, very quickly run through the 15 key points, just to kind of put some context around why staff have included those in the paper, and the key questions or points that we wanted to raise with each of those. And then Dan and Dustin are both here to help me address any questions or comments that council members may have after we run through the paper. So starting with the purpose, staff prepared this issue paper at the council's direction. And this paper summarizes key topics to be addressed as we work towards updating the Delta Plan's interim policies for state investments in Delta levees. The issue paper will help inform the council's levee investment strategy, which also in turn will guide the updates to the Delta Plan's regulatory policies, its recommendations, and some of the narrative as it's related to state investments in Delta levees. The methodology that we utilized to pull this paper together really kind of counted on different factors and papers and reports and individuals that we talked to. And really what we did was, the first thing we did was we went back to the statute, as we always do, and we took another good look at the wording and the directive from the Delta Reform Act. We also went back and looked at the bill analysis for SBX 71 around the Delta Reform Act and took a look at what it said in terms of the need for the council to lead this effort to develop a comprehensive set of recommendations for priorities in state investments for Delta levees. We also looked at a wide range of different reports, technical papers, plans, ranging back from the 50s, the 70s, to documents that have been released this year. And there was a lot of good information, obviously, in all of those documents and a lot of paperwork to get through. We did some consultation with some of our sister agencies, talked to some of the key individuals there in terms of making sure that we were characterizing the information we were taking from different programs or plans and reports, running some of the information past them, and also getting their assistance on other resources that we might utilize or couldn't obtain ourselves, such as some of the older reports. And then we did a little bit of taking a walk backwards through the Delta Plan development phase. So thinking about all of the comments, at least for those of us who are part of that, thinking back to the comments we heard, the questions, the concerns, the discussions, and thinking about how to bring some of that into some of these key issues, and what were the questions that were raised back then that we still must consider as we move forward in updating the Delta Plan. And then lastly, we have been hearing more and more from stakeholders, from some of our agency folks, just as we've begun this Delta levee investment strategy process. Again, just reiterating some of their questions, their thoughts, their concerns, and we factored some of those into the paper as well. So a lot of sources of good information. Obviously, we know through the comment period we'll continue to receive additional information and suggestions and whatnot, but felt like it was a good place to start in drafting this paper. So before I launch into running through the 15 key points, I just wanted to remind everybody of the 3 questions that we posed in the staff report. And really what we wanted to do with those is use those as a little bit of the basis of discussion after we get through going through the paper and the highlights of the paper. Quick reminder to folks who may not have had a chance to look at the report. What we wanted to keep in mind was, have staff captured all of the key points? Are we missing any key questions, any key issues? Are there some of the questions in the paper itself that may need to be revised or reframed in some way? So something to be mindful as we walk through today, as well as the comment period after this. And then which of these 15 issues really rise to the top in terms of early consideration by the council? You know, things that we really need to be thinking about now in these early stages of the Delta levee investment strategy and this update process. And which of the issues, if not already part of the Delta levee investment strategy, this technical work that the consultants are doing, should be part of that? And some of them are. But if not, we would want to hear some input on that. And then lastly, additional ideas for agencies, individuals, stakeholders that we should be engaging with in terms of this issue paper and the Delta Levee investment strategy work as we move forward. We have a good list. We've been talking to a lot of folks, but given what's in the issue paper, it might raise some additional thoughts as to agencies or staff or individuals we should be talking to. So we as staff would like to get that kind of feedback on all of these questions today. So with that, let me maybe walk through the paper very quickly, and I'll go through the 15 key points, starting on page 6. And again, with these 15 points in here, what we've done is to provide some background information around the question, some of the references we used to glean the information from, and then just some key points that we should consider as we move along in our updating process. So starting with basic question number 1 on page 6, what are the Delta's levies? Essentially what we wanted to do with this one was to, again, just remember that the Delta Reform Act calls for recommendations in the Delta Plan for both project and non-project levies. And we provide a brief description of what each of those are. And one of the key points that we want to make sure that we give some thought to as we move along is the levees in Sassoon Marsh, and we've raised that in this particular question. The DWR's Delta Levee Special Projects Program does include some portion of levees in the Sassoon Marsh. That was a change made in 1996. We described that here in the paper. But the question really beyond that is, what is the extent of the state's interest and the state's investments in these levees? So moving on to key point number 2 on page 8, what goals and objectives should state investments in Delta levees further? And what we've done here is, obviously, we've captured the Delta Reform Act's objectives as we have them in the Delta Plan, so the provisions for reducing risk and for providing guidance on levee investments. But in addition to those, we've also listed and should be mindful of the co-equal goals, that is a state directive, and really what that adds overall to the greater list of state goals and objectives that should be considered when we're recommending priorities for investments in Delta levees. And one of the things we wanted to acknowledge in this particular key point is that there are going to likely be times where there will be inconsistencies, conflict, complexity to looking at these different goals and objectives and how we factor all of these into a recommended set of priorities. So moving on to page number 9 and key point number 3, what are the state's interests in the Delta? Again, much like the second point, what we've done here is we have clear direction out of the Delta Reform Act that's incorporated into the current set of interim priorities in the Delta Plan. And the direction is to attempt to reduce risk to people and property. We know that's very clear. But there's this third part to that, which is state interests in the Delta. And so what we've done is to go through using the Delta Reform Act, other legislative provisions, and the Delta Plan itself to list out what we think the other state interests would entail. And in a nutshell, it would be a more reliable water supply, both protection of water quality and conveyance, Delta ecosystem and what it entails to preserve, restore and enhance the ecosystem. That includes looking at protection of water quality, providing for additional or enhanced habitat, and in some cases it may be considering alteration or removal of some levees or stretches of levees for habitat purposes. And then lastly, of course, we always have our Delta's place category, and that includes a myriad of factors, looking at the agricultural-based industry or economy in the Delta, other infrastructure that's critical in addition to water management facilities, roads, railroads, gas and energy facilities, telecommunication. Also being mindful of recreation and how that relates to levee improvements and levee-related activities, and then protection of the legacy communities that are in the region. So I'm moving on to key point number 4 and jumping to page 11 if you're flipping through with me. This one, very straightforward, at least as we have couched it in the paper, what threatens delta levees. We point out the fact that the levees, many of them are very old. Many of them were not built to certain recognized standards, and they were built using available materials, which are susceptible to different geologic and hydrologic threats, including subsidence, changing inflows, sea level rise, and earthquakes. And so, of course, these are the threats that we want to be considering and taking a look at as we go through and update priorities for levee investments. Number 5, same page, number 11, page 11, who's responsible for the delta's levees? And this one really, it's a lot of text. What we've tried to do is go through and identify who are the different agencies, the different programs. We know it's a very complex mix of private landowners, local agencies, state agencies, federal government has a role. And so we've gone through to kind of identify that. And really the key point here is that it's a very complex set of players, a lot of different responsibilities. We know from our experience in establishing the interim priorities that are currently in the Delta Plan, this is a very large group and varied group of interests that we must work with as we went through that process, but also as we work through updating those. So again, just identifying and those who have responsibilities and what those responsibilities are and acknowledging them. So question number 6, or I'm sorry, key point number 6 on page 13. What plans guide the state's investment in delta levees? As we went through our research, we realized there are many state plans and also non-agency reports like PPIC reports and others that really had suggestions, had guidance for investments in state investments in the delta levees. And the key point here is acknowledging these, looking at how all of these will work in conjunction with the Delta Plan as we update our priorities. So again, a lot of text around this, but really acknowledging there's a lot of work that's been done and how do we bring this all together in a coordinated manner in the work that we are doing. Moving to key point number 7 on page 15. How are Delta levee maintenance, operation, and improvement funded now? And really, again, through a lot of research and going through a lot of different documents and having different discussions, what we wanted to bring together here was the picture, again, of complexity. Depending on what type of activity you're looking at, whether it's maintenance, operation, repairs, improvement, there are different responsibilities, different players, different cost share, different programs. All in all, we realize that the state has provided and will continue to provide the majority of the investments for all of these activities. And we have, we've broken it down into some of the expenditures, some of the cost shares. We recognize that the investments have been made largely through 2 DWR program, the subventions program, as well as special projects, and that Propositions 84 and 1E have been a very large funding source for many of these activities. And the question here within the key point really is taking a look at how we will continue to pay for levee improvements and what will the funding sources be as we move forward. So moving to key point number 8, which is on page 18. What level of delta levee improvement is warranted? Again, much like the responsibility question, this was one that we wrestled with quite extensively as we developed our interim priorities in the current Delta Plan. We recognize that there are different standards, different plans that recommend levels of improvement for Delta levees, and obviously it's a question that we will be wrestling with as we move through updating our priorities. And it is definitely something that is factored into our Delta levee investment strategy. And also in the paper itself, we've included some thoughts for criteria that we might want to utilize to help guide us through making these judgment calls or these decisions. And I won't walk through them, but we've tried to put at least some context and detail around thoughts for additional criteria to think about. Okay, and then I am on to key point number 9, which starts on page 20. How should levee maintenance and improvement costs be allocated? So this really is the question about who pays, and it really kind of brings together many different, well, not many, but several different key and important questions about cost share, about beneficiaries, about identifying all of those who benefit from levee protection. This really ties into the DPC's current effort around their assessment district feasibility study. This is a large part of what they will be looking at in conjunction with our work to identify categories of beneficiaries. One of the things that we wanted to really bring together in this section is the cost share information. And again, it's having been one of the people that was digging through many bits and pieces of information, realizing that there's a lot of information, but it differs. It differs between activities. It differs in terms of the levee types. Sometimes there's federal participation, sometimes not. So a very complex topic that we will need to give consideration to as we move through our work. Okay, key point number 10 on page 22, what is the federal government's role? And there's 2 key points that we make in this particular issue statement. The first is identifying that most recently there appears to be a trend of the federal government not advocating for investments in non-project levees in the Delta. And this is really, can be seen through the Army Corps' Delta levees, make sure I get this right, Delta Islands and Levees feasibility study that they released this year that concluded that per their cost-benefit ratio and their economic analyses, that investments in non-project levees in the Delta were not cost-effective, and therefore they would not be making recommendations for that. We do recognize that project levees in the urban areas will likely, are either authorized for federal funding or will likely continue to be. But the second facet of this particular issue statement is about recovery assistance and looking at where we stand right now with FEMA's HMP program, with the Army Corps' PL 8499 program, and the ability for local maintaining agencies to remain eligible for these programs. And as you know, these are the programs that will participate in cost share post-disaster for recoveries and repairs of levees. And so we wanted to acknowledge that this really is a key issue. We know that the Army Corps is looking at revising some of their policies, so it's in a state of flux. So for planning purposes, it's going to be one of those difficult things that we will have to navigate through and sort of stay in step with where they end up with their policy and the timing of that. And then the last point, of course, obviously, is without federal assistance for post-disaster recovery, that the cost to both the state and the locals obviously is increased for repairs and recovery. So something that obviously we will be mindful and paying attention to. Key point number 11 on page 23, what conditions should be attached to state funding for levies? What we've done in this particular point is to take just a quick background information and really kind of summarize the difference. What are the state requirements for the local maintaining agencies to receive state funding for levee improvements? And we've listed them in here, which is, they must agree to perform annual routine maintenance of their levees and agree to indemnify the state from liability for damages related to state-funded levee projects. But we've also wanted to point out that local agencies are not required to participate in federal programs, which have a different set of requirements. And the one we've sort of pointed out in here has to do with acquisition of easements and how through that process there may be a mechanism to improve flood management. So, and again, just I think as we go through and look at making our recommendations for state investment in Delta levees, being mindful of what the local agencies are required to do or can do, will factor obviously into our consideration on some level. Key point number 12, what provisions should be made to improve habitat for fish and wildlife or to provide public recreation? We recognize in this part of the paper that many of the state plans do at least consider or recognize that there should be provisions made for these other areas. We describe the different, to a certain extent, the different plans and their approach to this. We wanted a couple key points that became apparent to us as we went through this exercise of putting the paper together is that it may be considered more of a burden to the local agencies as they're wanting to do flood management projects. There's now this movement towards more multi-beneficial projects, including habitat, and how that affects the permitting process and costs for things. So we wanted to acknowledge that, know it's something that we will hear again and should be thinking about. And then also one of the points that we sort of decided we wanted to raise in the paper was, how well do we know if we're meeting the ecosystem objectives that many of these plans have put forward in terms of including these type of provisions in flood management work? And is there a need for more regular monitoring or monitoring at all to let us know, are these projects really paying off in the way that it was envisioned? So again, bringing those types of points up in the paper for consideration as we do our work. Let's see, key point number 13, page 24, what if locals don't act? And this one, again, much like the key point number 11, really we wanted to just provide a little background around local agencies' responsibilities in terms of maintenance and levee improvements. And in the face of not, for whatever reason, being able to do those type of activities, how should we evaluate that? How should we look at that? How should we look at the ability by the locals to do their regular maintenance and inspections? And how does that factor in to the work that we're going to be doing? And we've provided an example of, I guess, where in cases where the local maintaining agencies aren't able to do this, DWR has a mechanism by which they can establish a maintenance program, but it's not been done on a regular basis. And in fact, it's only been done for a project levies in the pocket area, which works for me because I live there. But obviously it's, yeah, I was kind of happy to find that out. But okay, and then key point number 14, page 25. How should the state's levee priorities address the risk of state liability for levee failure? And in this, we talk about both the case where the state was not found liable and obviously the other case where it was. But really what we wanted to highlight here was that in the work we do, it's going to be important to retain the current levels of protection against state liability as called for in the statute, and also that was not changed by the enactment of the Delta Reform Act. And in fact, as you recall in the Delta Plan, we have a recommendation that calls for further limitation of state liability. So we wanted to acknowledge that in the paper, that as we move forward, we want to maintain at least the level that we have, if not taking it a step further. And then last question, key point we have in the paper is on page 25, what about climate change? Obviously, a factor that will complicate our analyses in many ways. We have good information now. We know the data will continue to be generated, will become better over time. So it's really going to be a balancing act of looking at, in terms of recommending priorities for state investments, how do we factor climate change in now? How do we not do any sort of an abandonment approach, given what we might know today, but that may change over the future. So just recognizing that we will definitely need to be factoring this into our evaluation. So that is at least a walkthrough of the paper, and I'm sure Dan or Dustin might want to add some thoughts into where I may have.
Yeah, I think a key thing to keep in mind, this is not a new exercise. We're going back and looking at the state's involvement of this, beginning in 1975, shortly after the first state funding for levees was put together, the Department of Water Resources developed, and the legislature conceptually adopted a plan for improving and maintaining delta levees. So it did many of the things that we're trying to do here. And about every 10 years, that process has been renewed. There was the plan for 1975 was done in anticipation that the peripheral canal would be built. In 1982, DWR updated that plan after the rejection of the peripheral canal. CalFed did a plan in 2000. The DREAM study was done later in that decade. So we're the fifth guys to come by and work on it. And there's a lot to build on, and we realized reviewing these that almost every effort that had been undertaken addressed the very same questions. That's part of what leads us to the list of questions we have. One of the things that really stands out is the substantial cost of levee improvements that are needed. Projects that are in the Central Valley Flood Protection Board's plan for the project levees, and the estimates of desired improvements just to get to the basic PL 8499 standard. That's the standard where the Corps of Engineers would help rebuild levees after a disaster. You put those two things together, and it's about $3.8 to $4.2 billion in current funds. The non-project portion of that is $1.4 billion. The new water bond has $295 million in it for the traditional programs that support non-project levees. So the gap between what's needed and what we can accomplish is, with the funds that are likely to be available, in the foreseeable future, is substantial. So there's no doubt priorities are needed. We think when we discussed this as the Delta Plan was developed, our argument was a lot about, well, how much improvement should we do? Well, in reality, our challenge now is what improvements are we going to have to defer or be unable to accomplish, and then understanding what that deferral would do in terms of the threats that are there, how that would affect the state's interests and the quality of the Delta environment and the hazards to the people who live there. We have made progress, and I think if we spend more time with these plans, we'll be able to identify more carefully what that progress has been. Adjusted for inflation, though, the total cost of improvements that are required hasn't changed substantially from the CalFed estimate of $1 billion of levee improvements to the most recent investment proposals. And yet, we've lost federal participation in the non-project levees. So of a $1 billion budget that CalFed had estimated for levees, we've lost $500 million. So while we've made progress in improving levees, the burden we face as a state in terms of funding levee improvements is actually gone up. And so the questions of, well, what are the first things we have to do, recognizing that many things are important and everybody wants good protection. The challenge of identifying, well, what are we going to be unable to do, and how are we going to make those decisions is substantial. That would be my wrap up, I think, on this.
Thank you.
Do you wish to take questions now, or do you have, would you like Dustin to?
I think it'd be your preference, Mr. Chairman. I think it'd be easier maybe to take questions now, and we can go through the paper, and then Dustin can wrap up telling us what got coming after that, but it'd be up to you.
Excellent. Okay. Colleagues, questions? Patrick?
Wasn't it Senator Howard Way who sponsored the first levee subvention program bill? And he was from the San Joaquin Valley, an agricultural area. Did the legislature or the state determine that the investment in a levee rehabilitation program was tied to water exports or some specific state interest?
In a couple of different provisions in the Water Code, the legislature has identified some purposes for the state programs, and they have it. And we've summarized those. I have to see if I've got the code section cited in here. But they're not as specific as simply being tied to exports. They recognize the important value the levees play in maintaining the delta's landforms of winding channels and islands, the importance of maintaining water quality and protecting health and safety. The Special Projects Program in particular articulates specific state interests in terms of infrastructure, in addition to the other qualities I've talked about that are priorities for that.
Over about 40 years, the state's invested about $700 million, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And any estimate of what the other aggregate contributions would be by reclamation districts or
No, we don't
federal
have that number.
government?
We don't have that number. It's not well tracked.
Yeah, okay. This is a very helpful paper, and it's written clearly, and the tone is right, I think, for all of us and the public to look at some of the questions that are involved in this Delta levee investment study. So thanks for doing it.
Thank you.
Judge Damrell and then Larry.
You know, I'm going to hearken back to the USGS presentation. That kind of caught my attention. And particularly with respect to the seismic events that could affect the Delta, in particular, well, everything, but particularly the levees. And, you know, I'm reminded of we kind of live a doomsday scenario in many parts of life. You know, 9/11 certainly changed our way we travel and how we do things. It's all after the fact. And the reason we have those certain protections is that we don't want that to happen again. Climate change, global warming, same thing. These are basically doomsday scenarios that could affect us. And so we make changes, and we hope we make changes that address that ultimate kind of issue that could affect our planet. So, I guess my question is, I just learned of the Green Valley Fault today. I guess I'm the first person to know that, but everyone else knew that well. I didn't know it. I see this fault going right through the Delta. I'm always, you know, thinking of the Hayward Fault as the big baby that we need to watch for. But looking at this from a doomsday perspective, that we do in many ways in our society, environmentally, security-wise, all these things that happen that create that idea of the worst possible event that could affect us. So we have established matrices, I think, generally, in a lot of places, referring to global warming or security, what could possibly happen. Okay, with that in mind, suppose the USGS told you within 48 months we're going to have an historic seismic event on the Hayward Fault, or God forbid, the Green Valley Fault, where it runs right through the Delta. Would that change your priorities in determining, I'm not saying that's going to happen, this is obviously hypothetical, but suppose our new partner told us that, you know, there's an 80% chance in 6 months, or 6 years, or 5 years, there will be an historic event of that nature in the Delta that would affect the Delta in a catastrophic way. Would that change your priorities in terms of how you view the various questions that you address with respect to the levees in the Delta? If you knew that, would you think, well, wait a minute, we'll just go back this up and we'll put some more emphasis on other things and then what we're talking about?
Well, I think you can see in some ways in response to the drought now, another catastrophic event, how that has altered some of the state's priorities. So I suspect you'd see a similar response. First, the governor would declare it through executive order. He would, you know, declare an emergency.
I'm not talking after the fact.
No, but even advanced. You know, you declare it an emergency. That would free up this process from many of the laws, perhaps, that control it. I think you would see some of the more emphasis on some of the immediate needs of public safety, and we'd say, oh, we'll get to the environment stuff later. But the water quality issues would always be essential. You know, the framework that the Delta levees provide for the tidal hydrology of the Delta is what protects our water quality. And in the absence of those levees, we might have to release tremendous quantities of fresh water from storage, you know, to deal with repulsed seawater. So I think the fundamental framework would probably stay very similar.
So, in other words, what we have here, if you were to be told there would be a seismic event, it wouldn't really change what you're planning right now. I mean, I'm not saying it should or
Yeah,
shouldn't. I mean,
yeah.
I'm just trying to understand.
And partly, I say this in all frankness too, somebody asked me the other day, well, would you write down your secret plan for levy priorities? And I just gave them a sheet of white paper. Because I think the challenge that we have trying to allocate the small amount of funding we have available in relation to the need is really substantial. And I think it's a decision we all need to make together, because there's not a right answer. And so I'm not even sure I would say, well, here's what my priorities would be if I knew there was going to be that kind of disaster in 18 months.
I'm not arguing the priorities. I think, by the way, this is excellent. First, I really read this over. I think this is terrific. I looked at it last night, and this is really gives you a handle on this problem. I was just teeing off on Mr. Kelly's comments, and I thought, wow. I mean, suppose these are great partners to have. They can do the kind of work that we need to have done in order to predict or possibly prepare for something like that. But we know what happened in Napa. No one expected it. And I think, we live with the idea we'll never die. We'll be everyone in this room will be here 10 years from now. Well, it won't be here for 10 years from now. And we're going to see a seismic event at some time. I just think that idea in California on the coast, that ought to be given a lot of serious thought. In terms of, I'm not suggesting we live under a doomsday, but I just think it's a little different here than I think elsewhere in the planet. And I think obviously you may have your priorities correct, and you may not be able to do much more about it than what you've got here. Because I think it's terrific. I just was taken by that notion that there are faults running through the Delta, and these folks are the ones that deal with those kinds of issues. Maybe it's just we hold their hands and make sure they tell us all they know. That may be it in terms of preparation.
And the priorities that DWR has used to expend funds now do take account of that. It's not like we didn't understand several years ago the risks that earthquakes posed, and it's been under this. The general threat's been imposed for a long time. We might, 18 months could happen tonight, and so funds have been spent in a way that does anticipate those risks. I think pretty well. I think the real question is, we know we're not going to be able to eliminate those hazards.
Right.
They're always going to be there. And so what's the top priorities?
Okay.
This question was something that the council addressed very early on, and Phil and I convened a committee to address early actions or interim actions, and one of those was emergency preparedness and response. And it goes along with your question. There's been a lot of progress made on preparing for the potential for an emergency in the Delta. Communication systems. We got a report just a few months ago about how they have coordinated the communication systems. So everybody in the Delta now is on the same channel. That wasn't the case in 2011. So I think our approach to this levee investment strategy is we need to pedal as fast as we can to develop a really good product to guide spending, recognizing that the threat is real and that there is the potential that we won't get to the finish line before some emergency or catastrophe occurs. Larry?
I was going to basically say very similar things. The Delta folks have not just sat around and said, "Oh, woe is me! The world is coming to an end." There's been money spent in the preparedness. The Delta Protection Commission is working on that. How do we put that funding source in place? Because all the engineers that you talk to at DWR and everything say, yes, there are solutions. Yes, you can bring these levees up to a certain level of soundness. It just takes money. And whether the number is $2 billion, $4 billion, the number is there. It's not, as you said, it's pretty much the same number that we've been talking about for the last 30 or 40 years, but the will to spend it has evaporated, or not been as strong as it could be. So Delta Protection is working on that. This program is to work on the prioritization. There is good things that have happened in the Delta. There are people in the Delta that can speak to these various on the ground today, what's going on. there are folks down in my neck of the woods that will tell you that they didn't like the tone, that they didn't think it was, that they thought it was, that the butcher's thumb was on the scale. I'm not going to go there. What I'm going to say is, I think this is a good starting point. I've talked to Cindy and Dan about making sure that they talk to the folks in the Delta, the engineers that work on these levees, the folks that are doing the preparedness, and make sure that they feel that this final report that comes out has their, that they've been given as much time and access to making this right. Because, again, it's a matter, I bring it up almost every meeting, it's a matter of trust. You build the trust. And I think the state could go a long way if it released some funds to actually work on these levees. And as far as the prioritization goes, I would say most of the folks in the Delta would say, yes, we need urban protection. There are those in the audience that would say, we'd like our water supply channels to be firmed up ahead of, say, some purely ag island. But the Delta levees are a system, and you have to remember that. And if you start to discard islands and non-projects, and all of a sudden, that system will operate totally differently. And the risk of catastrophic failure is more than if so we all know that there's, going to be the squeaky wheel that gets the grease first, but all the wheels need to be maintained.
Phil and then Susan.
I think this is a terrific paper, and you guys get a lot of credit for giving a whack at it. What I thought was the most interesting was trying to blend the effort you made to try to blend together the history of flood-related issues and responsibilities and duties and all of that in California or in this region, together with the existing law. My experience in politics has always been, if you don't like the existing law, you act as if it doesn't exist, and you just talk about equities. And it's so important to have history to let people like us understand remind us what's going on, but also the law is important. So one of the things that I was very intrigued about is the weaving together of old and new laws. I mean, I assume this, you start with the Delta Plan on 2013. Am I correct that the first code section you cite on page number 2 is Pat Johnston's 1992 statute? Yeah, that's what I thought. It's really interesting. I went back and read this a couple of times, and I found myself trying to put in chronological order in my mind the statutes, a simple explanation of them, and the legal cases you throw in some sense, a chronology. When you do your final paper, a chronology might be a useful tool to have to explain this. I think that's important. So I think that's one of the main strengths of this, is starting with the history and the law, and then of course, because we are the council, we adopted the Delta Plan, the language on the Delta Plan. The source of funding was interesting, and I understand how frustrating it must be. Pat raised this particular issue. Refresh my memory. I know the controller annually reports figures from the 250 top special districts in California, but my recollection is top in that case means biggest dollars, and they don't publish the results for other agencies, including the reclamation districts. Is that correct?
You probably know more about that than
Well,
I do.
the reason I say that is because the controller's reports they may be 3 years old in information, but there's actually some research that shows that contrary to skeptical state legislators and staff, skepticism that local governments would ever report anything accurately, they did in fact. PPIC did a study in the 1980s, by Mike Dardia, that found it was a remarkably consistent document of financial reporting. Anyway, the point I'd want to make is the one thing that is here, and Dan, I think you mentioned it, we don't have a handle on local contributions on levee flood-related issues. You've got your estimate in this report, which if I read it correctly, some, if not all, some districts are as low as $50,000 to as high as $100,000.
Well, that's based on testimony to the council.
No, I understand. I understand that, but in the absence of something else, I mean, I can't believe the reclamation districts are not required to at least make public a document on their budget and spending once a year.
I think that would be available. The challenge might be to separate out reclamation districts that also have larger drainage or irrigation functions from those who are strictly managing levees, and so the budgets might not be representative of their levy.
Here's the thing that I think on the cost sharing stuff that's so important is to scratch out whatever information we can find, and if we can't find it, to point out with clarity that either it's not required. I mean, I believe the law is every special district must file a report with the controller. I'm not sure of that, but I think that's right. And I would not be shocked if many don't, particularly the smaller districts. But this is like so many other things. The facts will guide the result, because ultimately the paper preliminarily shows that the Delta, unlike the rest of California, for non-project levies, receives a very high state contribution for payment of cost. That may not be a fully revealed picture, but it's what I read preliminarily out of this paper. And so I think an effort to try to nail down additional facts, maybe just write them a letter and ask them. I mean, you know, I know they'll be irritated, but that's at least a useful tool. The other thing that you reminded us of is because you started with the history and the law, is the obligations for project levies and non-project levies. And so much of the political debate around levies is about whether or not the state should pay a larger cost than currently paying for non-project levies. And the additional information would be useful. Also, I thought the most clear observation you made in here, and I just wanted to confirm it, there ain't no one around who expects the feds to spend a lot of money on non-project levies.
Yeah, I see no reason to expect there would be substantial federal support for that. I think we still want to re-examine the benefits the Bureau of Reclamation's water conveyance receives and figure out are there approaches that would enlist them to helping make that conveyance work. I think the other important thing to recognize, and I think those of us who come at this world from the environmental side as opposed to the water supply world, is because the levees are so central to California's federally approved water quality control plan for the Delta, I think it's useful to think about what other non-traditional sources of federal funds might be available that would typically be used for water quality issues, might be available for some of the levee work that's essential to the water quality objectives we all are trying to pursue.
I'm trying to remember back when the Central Valley Flood Board adopted their kind of updated plan in 2012 or 13, I forget which the year was. It was based on the DWR study that, again, I'm just pulling this out of dim recesses of memory, and this is all federally authorized territory. It's not, there are 2/3 of the Delta not covered by that, but that was like a $17 billion package of spending.
Flood plan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Roughly that.
I think we actually cited it maybe in here.
Yeah, you might have. One of the things that would be useful is try to more clearly tie in the financial implications, because Delta levy money doesn't stand alone. If there's Delta levy money, it will be tied to Central Valley project, Central California flood project spending as well. And I do know there, DWR was estimating that the feds would pay, if I remember correctly, 60% of the cost, although they added a paragraph saying, even though we said it, it wasn't a realistic figure, and the feds haven't. Yeah, there was some paragraph that was there.
In page 15, if I had my calculator, I could back it out, but we said the 2.3 to the very bottom of the page.
Yep.
We said the 2.3 to 2.8 billion dollar in Delta cost of the state plan of flood control is about 17%.
Yeah, but that's...
So that's maybe, 5 times 2.8 would get you, whatever, would get you $14 billion, and that's more in the range that I remember for the flood plan,
But
which is 12 to 14.
that was not an estimate of applying the Central Valley flood standards to the 2/3 of the delta not within their territorial boundaries.
No, that would be the...
Just
but-
that portion
yeah,
that's
yeah,
within their
yeah.
boundaries.
And so you think the total Central Valley plan was roughly 12 to 14 billion dollars, and then you see the
Okay.
statewide need is about 100 billion dollars.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see, I'll send you some notes on just technical stuff, but I do think you're going to wind up on pages 18 and 19 where you talk about what level of improvement is warranted. I think you're going to wind up needing to both annotate sources for some of the statements, particularly top of page 19, but expand the discussion. Because it is, that's one of our options that you talk about. People say, I only want to build a higher levee, broader levee, wide levees, whatever. And somebody says, well, you can achieve comparable results by doing other things. I think you're going to need to expand that. But I just want to wind up by saying once again, very provocative, very interesting, terrific start on activities. So thank you very much.
Good, thank you. Susan?
I agree that this is a really good, thorough paper of the issues, and I really appreciate all the work that went into this. To get back to Larry's point about this is a system. The flood legislation passed in 2007 talked about integrating the flood and water management systems, and as part of the state's interest, I think if not in this paper, perhaps in the analysis that goes into the prioritization, we consider how operation and possible reoperation of the water project system affects these levee systems, which is kind of alluded to on page 19. And also with regard to the system, I think one of the lessons we learned from Katrina is that you had some very strong levees next to some very weak levees. And so I think another interesting analysis would be to take a good hard look and maybe even map out keystone parts in the delta levee system where weak points are right next to strong points, and perhaps we should invest more in the non-project levees given their effect on the project levees. Again, it's an entire system. And then a third point, right now there are regional flood management plans being developed by regions that are interacting and being funded, interacting with and being funded by the Department of Water Resources. So those regional flood management plans are to inform basin-wide flood management plans for the Sacramento and San Joaquin basins, which will of course inform a system-wide plan, which will inform flood operations, which are of course tied to water operations. So this is a lot to ask in a levee prioritization analysis, but if it could at least contain a sidebar of how those particular plans and potential operations might affect the wear and tear on the delta levees, that'd be great.
Okay.
But great job.
Seems to be a consensus. Any further response to the issue paper? Then I think we're ready to proceed to Dustin to talk about next steps.
Yes. Thank you. I'm glad everybody liked the paper. So the next steps immediately for the paper project, as you know, it's been posted on our website, so we're opening it up for public comments, and I believe we're going for 30 days unless the council chooses to go longer than that. Once we've collected all the comments, we'll prepare our summaries and look at how we want to go about responses, and we'll work that through with the council after the 30-day period has ended.
Sir, I do need to have you speak into the microphone.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
No? Okay. After the paper comments have been gathered, and I'd like to talk about a little bit of the Delta Levee Investment Strategy project itself, some of the items we've been going over and our next steps for that. One of the things that we've really taken seriously, Larry's comments on the public outreach and getting the stakeholders involved within the Delta. So we've really been keying up our outreach efforts and developing our communication plan. We have begun some listening sessions with stakeholders within the Delta, and we are receiving feedback already on this plan that we're developing. So we really take that with pride and seriousness of what they're saying, and we're listening to how we want to go forward developing this methodology. So we want to make sure that everyone knows we are listening to comments out there.
Dustin, if I could interject, this process started about 3 weeks ago. I've been involved in some of those outreach meetings. I've made it a point to follow up with those in attendance to clarify what I hear, to make sure that you folks are receiving accurate information about opinions and thoughts and from experts in the Delta. So I wanted to assure my colleague that this process of outreach is already underway, and a few meetings have already been held.
Yes, thank you. We certainly appreciate you taking the lead on some of those, Randy. It's been very informative for us. In regards to that, so we have been finalizing our communication plan and developing our list of stakeholders of who we're going to engage. Last week, we received our draft communication plan from the consultants. We provided comments back for that, and we're having a follow-up meeting tomorrow to discuss our comments to the communication plan. We've also received drafts of the 2 group charters that we're working on, the interagency group within our Delta Levee Investment Strategy and also the policy group. We've provided comments on those along with a technical group that we'll be using as a pool of resources to guide our methodology. We've also developed a meeting schedule draft with our stakeholders that we're working through with our consultants to make sure we haven't missed anybody, and also make sure that the timeline is realistic with the number of meetings that we would like to convey, and getting the key people involved, and also keeping the project on budget, because there are a lot of interest in the Delta that we would need to meet with, so we have to be wary of our schedule and also our budget when we're planning all these meetings out. And secondly, lastly, as far as the data gathering has concerned, for the technical side of the studies and gathering information, that's well underway. We've been analyzing data that's been provided by the Department of Water Resources in their previous efforts, and we've also developed a list of Delta islands that we'll be looking at, and we're going to be forming consensus on that, looking at the islands, which ones actually need part of the analysis and which ones we may not need. We already know that some of the islands that have been submitted with the Delta list are not levied islands. They're just, they are recognized as islands within the Delta, but they will not be part of our study simply because they're not levied. Other than that, we're continuing with our communication buildup, and that'll take us well into November. Our peer review panel charge is well under development, and we have 6 of the 7 members for our peer panel selected, and hopefully the 7th member will be relatively soon. And with that, I'll take comments. Anything?
Your reaction to next steps, Larry?
There are those that will say that you should have about a 2.5 century, public comment time, and then but I think this is kind of a, as you say, it's the white paper. I think it's more important the study be gotten to, and that be where the folks can get their input if they don't feel that they're, there are those that are going to parse words with you on this study. That to me is, okay, fine. If you want to change will to shall or whatever, that's fine. Go ahead. But more importantly, get the study going, get it done, and make sure that everyone involved out there feels they've gotten their input. You've got a peer review set up. I mean, that to me is more important than the white paper. The white paper's kind of saying, well, this is what we hope and pray comes from all this. But more importantly, let's get to that study, because then I'd like to actually see a shovel get put in the ground and some of these levees fixed in my lifetime.
Other comments, Judge?
Underscore what Phil said about that chronology. I think that's a great idea. As an appendices or somehow connected to this, I think would really be very helpful.
Cindy, anything else?
Nope. I think that's it. I will just say public comment period is open. On our webpage, we will have information. We have a special email address that folks can email their comments into, and we'll take those through October 27th. And then we will.
October 27th,
Yes.
okay? All right. I presume we have some public comment? Great. Thanks, Pat. Greg Zlotnick, SLDMWD. Your handwriting's not very good. You should have been a doctor.
My father is a doctor, so I could read it. Anyway, thank you, Greg Zlotnick, San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority. It's a pleasure to be back. I think I've missed the last few of your meetings. Very quickly, Dustin actually answered a lot of the questions I was going to ask or wanted to hear about in terms of next steps, so I appreciate that. Just want to add kudos to the staff on the paper. Thought it was very good, clear. As a layperson myself, I found it very informative and educational, so I appreciated that. I do think that as it gets polished, looking at it as potentially an outreach and educational piece, I think is useful. You spiff it up with Keith or whatever. I think it's just a lot of good basic information sort of presented in a just the facts manner, and how it ties into the Delta plan and what you've been doing, I think is very well done. I would be remiss if I didn't respond to Judge Damrell's comment about what if you heard about this, what would you do? That's kind of where we've been for the last 7 years, knowing there's a high 2/3 chance of something happening in the Delta, so that's why we've been pushing our particular project to try to get beyond that as quickly as possible. The one specific question I have, and I'm pretty sure it deals with this, is the peer review panel. And it's my understanding there will be a charge developed for that panel, and from some back and forth with Dustin, it was indicated that charge would not be public prior to its finalization. I just raised that as a question, considering the interest in this and the potential for that charge to guide one way or the other, or not. I'm not assuming anything, but I think traditionally folks have been interested in understanding what the charge to your advisory groups are. So I just suggest that be maybe a topic of conversation. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. Next up, Melinda Terry. Penmanship a little better, but CCVGA.
I'm left-handed, so that's my excuse. Melinda Terry, Central Valley Flood Control Association, so it's a C, not a G, but sorry about that.
Welcome.
Thank you. First of all, just want to say we haven't had a chance to read the actual white paper yet, so my comments are really going to be limited to the 4-page staff report document. But I do want to start off by really thanking the chair and the staff. They have been meeting with groups, and we were one of them, and so they started the outreach early, and appreciate that. And we also commented that we thought the 18-month time period to take some time. We appreciate that as well. I'm going to skip kind of to page 2 under the issue paper where all the questions are, and just throw out some additional questions I hope that the staff and the council itself will consider thinking about, and some of them have somewhat been addressed already. But for instance, what was the historical intent? I had the way bill. We've been doing a lot of research lately because of the drought, going back into our records, and so just yesterday I had found some of the early documents from that. And then I believe the subventions program really, and it's about statewide investments and why the state really has an interest. And then after that, my understanding is in 1986, the program was beefed up again because of the floods of 1986. So it's always good to look back at that sort of stuff. But also, Susan had brought it up, but an important thing, I'm going to say it a little bit differently, but how do the Delta levees function as part of the larger state plan of flood control? When you look at the state plan of flood control map, the Delta levees kind of sit in between the Sacramento system and then their San Joaquin system, and that goes from Red Bluff down to Fresno. So that's the state's responsibility and liability when it comes to the need to reduce risk in the Central Valley. And then in the middle are those non-project levees in the Delta. But they clearly, being in the middle, affect the state's responsibility for all of those other, and so we hope you will really take a look at that. And Susan, as part of that, brought up that right now we're in the process of implementing the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, and we have the regional plans that actually are being finalized at the end of this year. 3 out of the 6 regions have portions of the Delta, and they each came up with lists of projects too, but you just might really want to consider that. This also got brought up, but what are some of the local funding constraints? It's not just the budget amount that maybe the local island RD can collect, but there are laws that have come into play in constitutional amendments, such as Proposition 218, which really put constraints on even the money that an RD does raise. They're limited by 218 on what that can be spent on, because that law was very clear that an assessment has to be benefits for individual parcels, and they have to be proportional. Anything beyond that, they consider it tax, and it has to be done through a different system. And it's not just proportionality, but it's, like I said, the benefit itself. So things that are considered general benefits, which might be recreation, habitat, those are not allowed to be covered under that. They, again, have to fall under some other taxing system as far as Prop 218. So we're very limited. The money has to go towards the drainage function that they have and the flood protection. And we hope you will really look at that. Also, on your questions 12 and 13, I listened to Cindy's explanation, and I think that was a little bit more helpful. And again, I haven't read the report, so we will, and we'll be submitting written comments by the deadline. But it was a little bit unclear what provisions should be made. I wasn't sure what that meant. You know, going back to the 218 thing that I just brought up, part of that is who is responsible for providing that in the Delta, because it may not always be the local landowner if there's statewide interest, or at least we can't potentially fund it under our assessments that we do. Number 13, yeah, it wasn't clear to me. I didn't even know what that meant. What if local agencies don't act? So I was assuming it means if we aren't somehow doing levee work or something, but again, it was broad and didn't have a lot of context for me, so I didn't know what it meant. A final thing on terms of the questions that I hope, I didn't really see on here, really determining the correct baseline and what conditions we currently have. That seems kind of fundamental, I think, to have in, and again, not having read the report is probably in there somewhere. I'm going to skip over to the last page. On the communication strategy, we would, I listened to Dustin's thing, we would like to see a copy of that when the draft is available for the public as soon as possible, just kind of see, because I know we gave a lot of names of who we thought should be involved, and so ultimately we'd just kind of like to see what that plan is as well. On the data compilation and review, Susan did bring this up. I had written down, yeah, we really hope that you'll take a look at the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, a lot of the work that was done there, the regional plans that I mentioned, and the basin-wide study are all going to have good information. And again, because those delta levees sit in the middle of their system that they're looking at, they are all related. And as part of that, we hope that you will not only get data, because I'm only seeing getting data from the state here, that you will really look to the local RDs, because they have expressed to your commission numerous times their frustration over the inaccurate information the state, or really outdated sometimes, that they are using, and they would prefer that we are using as up-to-date as we can. On the USGS that Judge Damrell brought up, and then when Greg got up and testified, it reminded me of something, and I can't remember what year, but it was a few years ago, and forgive me, I can't even remember who they sent the letter to. I can't remember if it was to the commission or the governor, but there was a group of, it was some water exporters like Metropolitan and probably Greg's group, Contra Costa Water District, which is in the Delta, East Bay Mud, and it was a group of folks that had submitted a letter about prioritizing funds and some levies that they were looking at in terms of water supplies. So you just might want to take a look at that, because I remember them naming them and kind of dollar amounts and things. So
Are you talking about the coalition?
yeah, there was this,
Yeah,
I don't know that they
it's
had
in
a
the white
name
paper.
for themselves or
Yep,
anything,
it's
but
in there.
yeah. And while, you know, being prepared and seismic is, you know, happens, but we don't know when. The one thing I will say is we do know that floods happen every 10 years, so they're not as hypothetical or as uncertain, if you will. We have a fairly regular schedule of flooding, and so, you know, from our standpoint, that's certainly what we always want to be prepared for when looking at these investments and the risk that we want to reduce. And I really like the idea of the chronology too. I think that's important, because that's where we start seeing the repetitive. You see how often these floods were coming, and of course they tend to be right next to when we were having the droughts too. Mother Nature, either it's, you know, flood or drought, it seems like. But as part of that history, the thing that I would recommend maybe adding in there is not just the statutes and the history itself, but the history of the floods. I didn't really hear you, you know, mention that. So for instance, I had mentioned 1986. Well, it was those flood events that often drove why statutes happened right after that, the changes to subventions. So sometimes putting those flood events into the chronology, you will see how legislation, Katrina, right after that event is when we got all of the flood legislation in 2007 and the implementation of the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. So you might want to add those in, because I think they show the nexus of why you ended up with some of those laws. But we will submit our comments, and do appreciate all the work and the outreach that is being done, and look forward to it. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Melinda. Just one final note before we break for lunch. I could not be more proud of our staff and the dedication that they are applying to so many things, in particular this project. From Jessica on down, the extra hours that have been put into this already, and just getting this launched is remarkable. And we're very appreciative of you. And comments today, I hope, inspire you to that you're on a good path, and we look forward to the next deliverables. Thank you for presenting. We will now break for lunch. It is 12:10. We'll reconvene here at 1:15. 1:15. Thank you.
I've started.
To reconvene this council meeting. The next item will be file item number 9. I see Peter Goodwin scurrying to prepare for the presentation of the draft interim science action agenda and to describe for us next steps.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to make just a few introductory comments to let you know how we got to this point. And then I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay Correa and Sam Harroder, who've actually been putting the nuts and bolts of this together. So if you recall, the interim science action agenda was a priority for you, set for us at the beginning of the year. And we've been working on this as a priority right from the beginning of the year. So the purpose of what we're doing today is to give you basically an informational overview of the draft interim science action agenda, which was posted on September the 10th. And then we'll summarize the next steps in the development and how we intend to wrap up the science action agenda. And of course, we're looking to you for ideas, input on what you see so far. So, first of all, the interim science action agenda is an expression of the broad science community. It is not exhaustive by any means. It's a start. And currently this is being you reviewed and discussed in many different venues. But if we step back just a little bit as a reminder, when you received and accepted the Delta Science Plan at the end of last year, and this concept of one Delta, one science, and the science plan that is out there is like how the various science fits together. And this trilogy had two other parts. One was the Science Action Agenda, which is a work plan for conducting science around priority areas. And the third part is the State of Bay Delta Science, which says, what have we learned from the science that's been funded in the previous few years, and using that information to inform the next cycle of the Science Action Agenda. So when we were starting at the beginning of the year, you had an immediate problem, if you recall, in the science plan, that there was a 4-year cycle, so that the Science Action Agenda would govern a 4-year cycle with the idea of an update after 2 years. But the State of Bay Delta Science would be exactly out of phase with that. So they would be 2 years apart. The difficulty we had is starting in year 0. We immediately started the State of Bay Delta Science, but we couldn't sit around and wait for the cycle to evolve. So it's called Interim for many reasons. First of all, it's to get the phasing correct. Secondly, when we spoke with other large ecosystem restoration programs around the US and internationally, to really get the Science Action Agenda correct, the fastest time we found was about 2.5 years, and that was the work that Tracy Collier did on the Puget Sound. And as Lindsay reminded me last night, that date was actually set by state law. So it's a difficult thing with so many players involved to put together. And then thirdly, what should the Science Action Agenda look like for the Delta, for the Bay Delta, for our particular system? And so the Interim Science Action Agenda is really a transition to the full Science Action Agenda. We'll put out this Interim Science Action Agenda by the end of the year, and it's an opportunity for different entities to say what is of value and what's valued by their institution. How is this Science Action Agenda going to really work for them? So that's where we are with the interim. To talk very briefly about the process, and I know you don't like to dwell on this very much, but I think it's important. When we committed to doing the Interim Science Action Agenda initially, I think that we, meaning the broad science community, were somewhat naive. Our idea had been that we would pull together all of the science plans from different agencies, different organizations, different entities. We would supplement that by the Independent Science Board recommendations, the National Research Council, and the numerous reviews that have been done over the last few years with recommendations. We started pulling all of that together, and then we had a workshop early in the year to present these early findings. And what came out of that workshop was folks saying, oh gosh, you didn't look at that science plan that's 2 years old, did you? Because we've got much better stuff, but it would be coming out a year or so from now. And so other problems we realized was that different reviews, different science plans had a massively different level of detail in them. And bringing these ideas together across different agencies was really problematic. It's different spatial scales, different time scales, different level of description of what needed to be done. So what came out of the workshop as the next step was to build on that foundation of what was out there and to conduct in-depth interviews of scientists and managers. And it's not exhaustive, we want to be clear about that, but we wanted to do enough to develop the primary themes. As a result of these in-depth interviews, which were conducted orally, the note-taking was then transcribed and sent back to the folks who had been interviewed for editing. So they had a chance to make sure that what they were saying was accurately corrected. And so that was the starting point, and Lindsay and Sam will talk about that in a lot more detail. What I've heard at the other end of the process is that those folks that went through that actually said it was a very valuable exercise. They appreciated the discussion, appreciated the opportunity to view their science in the bigger 1-delta-1 science context, and found it very helpful. So to try and preempt some of your questions, what this is not is an attempt to subvert agency missions, because many of the science activities are mandated either by the agency mission or by court orders and similar. So the intent is not to interfere with that work that has to take place, but to provide a much broader context for how these various activities align where significant gaps are occurring. It's also intended to highlight the most important needs and activities that need to be conducted. And also, perhaps most fundamentally, it gets at the National Research Council review, where they identified this really great science that's being done in narrow areas, but very little attempt was made to connect the science to understand system-wide response. And so by pulling it together under these needs, it starts also getting towards a cohesive way of quantifying uncertainty and sensitivity. How we see the interim science action agenda being used. First of all, by the time we're done, we hope that this will reflect the various agencies and entities' science priorities, enabling an agency to director to explain internally and outside their organizations where their science fits in the larger context. You'll also see that there's an extensive matrix that summarizes the inputs so far. And we've already seen this being of value where people have said, gosh, I didn't know a group over here were working on that area, or I didn't know that this was an area that your agency was interested in. So it's helping to connect the science community. It also contributes to transparency so that folks can see what's going on. And eventually this will be linked with action item 2.3 of the Delta Science Plan, which is the web-based tracking system of science activities. We're also seeing this in 2015 of helping guide any PSPs and the Science Fellows solicitation that might come out. The large priorities that represent across agency boundaries should be highlighted in this. And one of the other important activities that this will, or functions that this will serve, is that funding for science will always come from multiple sources. The single professor working with a couple of graduate students, applying to some pots of funding. And so we hope that this will be a guide where people can see where collaboration across different agencies and different entities make sense. And in addition to that, we see this not just serving our community, but allowing researchers anywhere in the nation or internationally, potential science fellows and others, to use this document as a reference to see where perhaps where data exists, where they could apply some of their technologies and research. So, as I say, we're in the public comment period for until I think it's about October the 9th. And what we're asking folks for is what's missing from here, how can perhaps some of these focus areas be honed a little, and also to encourage people to start thinking this is an interim document. It'll be out there to guide us in the short term, but based on this, how do we then transition to the full science action agenda? So I hope that sort of sets where we are in context right now, and now I'd like to turn it over to Sam and Lindsay. And also, as the chair's also mentioned today about the commitment of staff, I think right across this has been a huge endeavor, and particularly for Lindsay and Sam, hours and hours outside the regular office time, if I'm allowed to say that, but it's been quite an achievement to date. So, Lindsay.
Well, thank you. And thank you. This has been a really interesting and exciting effort to be a part of. And I'd just like to remind the council that as well as this being a priority for the council, the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee, who we heard has a strong interest in science earlier today, also identified the interim science action agenda as a priority for implementing the vision of the Delta Science Plan, One Delta, One Science, which, just to remind you, is an open Delta science community that works together to build a shared state of knowledge with the capacity to adapt and inform current and future water and environmental decisions in the Delta. And as I continue with this presentation, I just want to highlight how we are already making progress as a science community on achieving the One Delta, One Science vision. So as Peter mentioned, the draft interim science action agenda that you have in your packet was posted on September 10th. This public draft really represents a draft collaborative roadmap or direction for addressing the science needs of decision makers and managers in the Delta. It is, as Peter mentioned, an expression of the science community. Getting this draft out to where it is now wouldn't be possible without the broad cooperation and participation of programs and organizations that we interviewed as part of this process, as Peter mentioned, as well as those who participated in the May 6th workshop with support from the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee. This draft really demonstrates an openness and interest in making progress towards that vision of One Delta, One Science. So the draft that you have before you includes 17 priority science action areas, which are summarized in Table 1 on page Roman numeral 5 in the executive summary. These science action areas, when taken, will fill gaps in scientific understanding of the Delta and address critical gaps in the science community's capacity to provide timely, relevant, and legitimate decision support science. These action areas are opportunities for shared multi-agency or multi-organization investments for science-based decisions that support and contribute to achieving the co-equal goals. These 17 science action areas should not be confused with any order of importance. The way these are organized in the draft are into two main categories: science actions that address knowledge gaps, organized by the policy areas or chapters in the Delta Plan. Those actions in those categories include 12 science action areas. For example, understand the effects of habitat restoration and other management actions to address environmental stressors, understand the abundance and distribution of predators and their importance to native fish. The other 5 action areas are action areas that build the infrastructure and capacity to achieve One Delta, One Science. And these include actions such as Action 16, establish collaborative modeling approaches for the Bay Delta system. These 17 science action areas are the Delta Science Program's summary and synthesis and grouping of 315 individual science actions that were identified, as Peter mentioned, through focus interviews, as well as the Delta Science Program's review of existing documents. For example, the Delta Plan, draft versions of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, and independent review panel reports. So We conducted interviews with 21 agencies and organizations, and we reviewed 13 existing documents. Another example of how those existing documents' actions are reflected in the draft interim science action agenda include our look at the Governor's California Water Action Plan. For example, 5 of the action areas cover the range of science needs identified in the California Water Action Plan. For example, several actions within the Water Action Plan call for improving coordinated monitoring and assessment, which is one of the 17 action areas identified in the Interim Science Action Agenda. Within the draft document, descriptions of each action area are provided, along with short tables with just a few examples of some of the more specific examples of actions that we heard from interviews or that we identified through existing documents that fall within that specific action areas. Those short tables include both those specific examples and the source, be it the name of the agency or organization that provided us with that priority, or the reference document that it's from. So as Peter mentioned, an extensive matrix was also posted with the draft Interim Science Action Agenda. This is the Excel workbook that is posted with the draft and that contains the 315 individual science actions that were included in the synthesis. And those provide more details, including some of the information that we asked interviewees about relevant mandates or management decisions that relate to each of their priority science actions, as well as additional information about collaborating organizations or partners for the actions that are being planned or being implemented now. So the public posting of the draft Interim Science Action Agenda initiated a public comment period, as Peter mentioned. That public comment period closes on October 7th, and written comments will be accepted through email, and instructions are provided are outlined and provided on page Roman numeral 2 of the draft plan. So over the next 2 months, the Delta Science Program will be taking several actions to receive and incorporate comments, leading to the completion of the Interim Science Action Agenda. So I wanted to highlight some of our next steps within the next 2 months. So in October, we will be reviewing and incorporating comments. A few notable dates in October include October 1st, when the Delta Independent Science Board will hold a teleconference and discuss their review to the Interim Science Action Agenda. It is our hope that the Delta ISB will provide feedback on a number of things, but some of those include the appropriateness and usefulness of the roll-up or the grouping of the science actions into 17 action areas. Their thoughts on how we might lay out the Interim Science Action Agenda, as Peter mentioned, in laying the stepping stones for the full Science Action Agenda and the associated prioritization of actions moving forward. Another notable date is October the 7th, when the public comment period closes. We hope to receive comments from the science community as well as other interested parties, and especially from those that participated in the interviews. It's another opportunity for them to weigh in on what we heard from them. And then on October 29th, we will be presenting at the Bay Delta Science Conference on the Interim Science Action Agenda as part of a special session on implementing the Delta Science Plan. And then in November, the Delta Science Program will be working to finalize the Interim Science Action Agenda, and on November 17th, we'll present the Interim Science Action Agenda to the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee. So that is all I have to share with you. I'm going to ask Peter if there's anything that I missed. Otherwise, I'd be happy to answer questions and receive comments from the council.
No, as always, Lindsay, that was a very nice, concise summary. Sam, did you want to have anything to add to that?
Not really. I just want to say that I thought the most kind of interesting part of this was the interviews and talking to people, and I think opening up those lines of communication with the science community is probably one of the most useful parts of this, and I think we're going to be have to make a real effort to keep that communication going, and not this isn't going to be something that we just do every 2 years, or we're going to have to keep that process going continuously. So.
All right, Lindsay, I understand you did a lot of the investigative work in compiling the Excel workbook. Any big surprises as you went through that process of interviewing the other agencies and collating the results?
You know, I think it was just as Sam mentioned, the interviews were a really interesting exercise, and it was just a really positive experience to see how engaged and interested people were in not only sharing what they're working on or what they would like to do, but in expressing an interest to know what others are doing, and seeing the interim science action agenda as an opportunity to build on existing efforts, to build stronger partnerships. So I'm not sure if that's kind of a
good.
surprise.
Well, that's an affirmation that we're on the right path, and the work you're doing is really important. Comments or questions from the council, Larry?
This goes to action item 13, build tools and resources for adaptive management. Has anybody come up with a definition of that in the last couple hours?
Consulting with retired and now deceased Justice Potter Stewart, who did the famous definition of obscenity, which was he couldn't tell you what it was, but he knew it when he saw it.
After hours of viewing?
Well, we know that the Delta Plan outlines a process for adaptive management. We also know that a lot of the activity that has been undertaken in the Delta has been done in response to directives, and oftentimes the result is once the project is in place, they're done. And I think the science approach to adaptive management is once you've implemented a project, you're not done. That you have monitoring to take place to evaluate if you're achieving the benefits, and if not. So, Lindsay, help me out.
Right. So there are
31.
So as you know, there are science actions that have been identified as specific things that could be done to help make progress in that area, and the recommendations in the Delta Plan also further that idea with recommendations for developing, for example, landscape scale conceptual models for the priority habitat restoration areas, and that's an example of a tool or resource that would fall under that area. The Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta Conservancy has proposed a restoration hub and as a way of, or the restoration network and hub as a way of moving forward with providing big data platforms and supporting landscape scale vision. So those are the types of more specific science actions that are identified within that science action area.
I think earlier there was some discussion about the challenges of small restoration projects in implementing adaptive management. And one of the things I think the science program and the hub can do is to provide tools for them to do that more efficiently and more easily. So if they have, for example, good base maps, good GIS layers to look at their projects, know what the elevation is, what the vegetation is, that type of thing, they don't have to go through and reinvent that wheel and do that for each individual project. So that's the idea of the kinds of tools and things that we're, that are in that category in the interim science action agenda.
Answer your question?
I am the foggiest.
Patrick?
Thanks for putting in what does success look like. Will we get a periodic update on that, report card? So in other words, you said it would be fulfilled through coordinated work plans is one example, right? Like the 5-year coordinated work plan for wetlands conservation program, and then joint funding of priority science projects. And then, there's some other sort of measures, and some of them are more qualitative than quantitative, which is understandable, but I would think in part this is to be a reference point. Are we doing science that's relevant and coordinated, and if other people aren't doing it, then there has to be a pretty good reason, or else presumably the science community and the council and others would say, well, these are the areas that need being worked on, so how does it fit with those, right? I mean, that's the point. But will you be checking on that or giving us some interim reports that the different funding or research projects or other activities are consistent with the science action agenda, or where perhaps they're not?
Yeah. I think that to develop metrics like that is really important to show how folks are interacting. What you saw there is some preliminary ideas. I think that's something we're working on. And I'm not sure, Vice Chair Eisenberg, you remember when we were at Exceed, there's a lot of thinking going on about how do you demonstrate that the science going on is greater than the sum of the parts. So if we're truly successful here, it's not only efficiencies, but the rate of knowledge discovery is going to increase. So yes, I think there's several things that will be tracked there. One will be, of course, funding, but looking at publications that come out might be another one. Implementation of new technologies that have been identified as a need, whether it's providing support for the latest satellite that's going up, that's going to track all the aquatic weeds. Yeah, but things like that over time. I don't think we've really thought through all of the specifics of what that means, but the way things are around science in the US now, you have to be able to demonstrate the effectiveness. And that's part of the success criteria here that we've just begun to put together. But Lindsay, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just a couple of things. I think those are some of the things that would be highlighted in, for example, the lead scientist reports to you. There is number 8 in the list of what would success look like is that the independent science board's oversight of Delta science programs would be aided through the implementation of the interim science action agenda. And we expect sort of in the Delta ISB's review that they might comment on that statement. So that's another way that you would could potentially hear back on how well this is making progress on its implementation. There are in the Delta Science Plan, we have identified a state of the science address from a lead scientist on an annual basis, and that might provide another forum for getting an update on how this is making progress.
A long time ago, actually 1983, my recollection is that Phil suggested as a member of the Assembly Ways and Means Committee that proposals that would spend state money for new projects ought to have an evaluation and some metrics to figure out if it worked, as opposed to just be aspirational and get the money and never reappear. Caused great consternation among many legislators and proponents of ideas to spend money. And while all the funding streams and grants undoubtedly have an evaluation and a measurement internally, what you're trying to do without the authority, because you don't have the money, is to say all these discrete activities ought to be greater than the sum of the parts, as I think you put it, Peter, or they ought to be moving towards some of these priority areas. So measuring that and calling them out, even if it's just the calling out is the only authority we have because we're not in charge of the money, would be important. So, I mean, I don't mind a regular brief summary at our meeting or someone giving a speech talking about the state of science, but really it would be helpful on some periodic basis where there's some detail available on how these priorities are being currently addressed would be helpful. Or for instance, if nobody looks at it and is granting money for things that are inconsistent or ignore these or just do something else that, because you did a lot of work to figure out, well, what are the priority ones? And while they're not in priority order, I heard you say that, nevertheless, they're deemed to be the most important ones, right, in fulfilling the co-equal goals. Is that right?
That's what we asked them for. We
Right, that's
actually
what we
asked them
did.
for their top 5. Tell us
So
what
if you
your
found
highest
somebody
priority
granting
actions are.
money to do something that wasn't on these, I mean, maybe there's a good reason for it, but it seems to me we're here in part to hold everybody to account, and all we have is the good analysis and continued attention that you've provided so far.
Good. Thank you for those suggestions and recommendations. I think those are really valuable points for us to keep in mind. As Peter said, this will also be a starting point for achieving action 2.3 in the Delta Science Plan, which is to sustain a web-based tracking system of science activities in the Delta. So I think what you outlined are some really key points to consider as we develop that action or implement that action.
Perhaps if I can just elaborate, I think that's a very good point. And if you have thoughts about how to present that information to be compelling beyond the science community, that would be very helpful. But of course, with the state of the Bay Delta science, this is the whole point of being on this cycle. So you fund science, you then bring in a group of the best scientists to say what was learnt from that investment, and using that then to guide, could we sink another $50 million into this and we'll be no further forward? Or this is really making a lot of progress, we need to continue investing, or we know enough about the problem. So I think that built into this process, you will see the science community themselves doing some of this review in trying to get this system-wide understanding. But having clear metrics and not waiting for 2 years, I think, is also a point well taken when a lot of funding comes on a year-to-year basis.
Other comments or questions? All right. Lindsay, Sam, thank you very, very much for all your hard work. I want to reiterate my appreciation for all the hard work and good work that you're doing on this project, and for your leadership, Dr. Goodwin.
It's all these guys.
Well, thank you.
That completes file item number 9. On in keeping with our science theme, on to file item number 10, a preview of the 8th Biennial Bay Delta Science Conference, Making Connections. Yeah, unless you have to leave real quick. We're going to be wrapped up in a little bit. Don't forget to fill out the blue sheet. Now it is.
Okay.
Welcome, Marina.
Thank you. So good afternoon. I'm Marina Brand. I'm a program manager in the science program, and I'm here to give you a very brief overview of the Bay Delta Science Conference that's going to be held in Sacramento on October 28th to 30th. The theme for this year's conference is Making Connections, And it was selected because of the need for scientists to make connections among the external forces that impact the delta system, management actions, and ecosystem responses. It's even more important, however, for the scientific and management communities to work together to ensure that managers and policymakers are aware of the current scientific information as they make their decisions. Interest from scientists in this conference was quite high. We received 340 requests for oral presentations, 123 requests for posters. Unfortunately, we were only able to accommodate 254 oral presentations, but of the 86 oral requests that we had to decline, 62 of them elected to convert their information into poster format. So we ended up with 185 posters. So the conference will begin with a plenary session on Tuesday morning, and it will feature Mike Connor, who's Deputy Secretary of the Department of Interior, as the invited keynote speaker. Deputy Secretary Connor led the Department of the Interior's efforts and completed 2 major binational agreements with Mexico on the Colorado River and directed efforts to expand hydropower generation at existing facilities. As a previous commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation, he led efforts to promote the sustainable use of water to effectively address current and future challenges associated with water supply and power generation in the western United States. Additional plenary speakers include Chair Randy Fiorini, Lead Scientist Peter Goodwin, Independent Science Board member Stephen Brandt, and the previous Interagency Ecological Program Lead Scientist Anke Mueller-Solger, who is now an Associate Director for Projects at the USGS. Concurrent oral presentations will begin on Tuesday afternoon, and in the staff report I highlighted those sessions and presentations in which either council members or council staff are actively involved in, as well as sessions whose topics might be of interest to the council. I'd like to point out that Council Vice Chair Phil Eisenberg and Chair-elect of the Independent Science Board Jay Lund will be panelists on a session on how climate science can best influence public policy in an era of drought. As Lindsay Correa previously mentioned, Wednesday morning we'll begin with a session on implementing the Delta Science Plan, and speakers include Peter Goodwin, Reiner Honecker, and Lindsay Correa. And lunch that day will also feature a special session, and that session will consist of a panel on making connections among contemporary art, science, and communication. The last day of the conference, which is Thursday, will feature presentations, additional presentations by council staff, as well as a presentation from the Independent Science Board's chair, Dr. Tracy Collier. So in addition to the sessions that I've highlighted in the staff report, I'd like to mention a couple of others. On Thursday morning, there's going to be a session on understanding the effects of climate change on the Bay Delta. One talk in particular is of interest, and it will address the diminishing odds of normal snowpacks as California warms. Unfortunately, this talk coincides with your council meeting that morning. However, it's also my understanding that at your council meeting in November, you will have an item or items on floods and droughts, and some of this same information will be presented to you at that time. In addition, given the premise of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan to use habitat restoration to offset the effects of water exports, a session immediately following lunch on emerging tidal marsh restoration in Sassoon and the Delta for fishes may also be of interest, specifically a talk on the value of wetlands to aquatic food webs and fish that will be presented by Bruce Herbold. And you may remember that Dr. Herbold attended your January meeting and participated in a discussion on the role of tidal marsh restoration in fish management in the Delta. There'll be poster sessions on Tuesday and Wednesday evenings, and these allow for a more leisurely and in-depth discussion with scientists working in the Delta. And in addition to the aquatic food web poster that I mentioned in the staff report, there will be a poster on updating the state of Bay Delta science, which, as you know, is a high priority for the science program. There will be one on enhancing the vision for managing California's environmental information, and that's a direct output from the data summit that the science program hosted in June. And then there'll also be a poster on how the Delta Plan can help habitat restoration and adaptive management, and that one is being prepared by the Council's Jessica Davenport. I'd also like to encourage you to participate in another special luncheon event, which is on the first day, Tuesday. And what it is a student early career scientist mentor luncheon. And I would encourage you to think about acting as mentors for those young scientists who may be considering working at the interface of policy and science. And that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Marina, thank you for that overview. This is a real big deal.
Yes.
And I'm pleased that we've been able to arrange for the council to meet at the convention center in concert with this. And I'm surprised we're only missing one presentation that would conflict with our meeting. So thanks for that. Any comments or questions? A show of hands of everyone that plans to attend the conference. Thank you. Very good. Very good. All right, Peter?
Actually, I'd like to attend. I'd just like to add a couple of points, if you don't mind, Marina, just to stress that Deputy Secretary Connor is invited. So we asked to be clear about that. Also, just to thank Marina and an enormous cadre of volunteers, because the attempt over the years really has been to keep the registration fee to a minimum, to have maximum participation in the conference. So we rely on an enormous number of volunteers who've been working for months and months, and a lot of those meetings happen at odd times, like lunch times, evenings, goodness knows what. So thanks, Marina, for all of the rest of that enormous team that is working on this, particularly Wim Kimmerer and Lenny Grimaldo, who've been the technical chairs. But there's a massive group there.
Very good. Thank you. We have completed file item 11, so on to file item number 12. Greg, here's your moment. Public comment. You know what? Greg, sit down. No, wait. Yeah, we did. Yeah. We thought we had forgotten a very important item, approving our minutes. Yeah, we got that done.
Is this a self-declared, what did you call yourself? Layperson?
Levee stuff. Not
Okay.
everything.
File item 12.
Thank you. I'm actually going back to item 11, or 9 rather, I'm sorry, the interim science action agenda. And certainly Greg Zlotnick, San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority. Want to also acknowledge all the hard work that obviously went into compiling all that material and the interviews and what have you. Part of the concern that we have, and we will submit a comment as well, it may be semantic, I'm not sure, but in terms of the interim action agenda, the implication is that is direction for folks to be doing certain things. And it sounds like this may be more of an inventory of what all the agencies said they're doing.
Let me just ask a question.
Yeah.
Your clients are opposed to state and federal agencies agreeing upon a scientific agenda, announcing it and following it, unless it adjusts to your preferences?
Of course.
Well,
no.
If that's the
Mr.
case,
Vice Chairman, no. The question is whether that is in fact what the document is. Whether
if it's not that, it's nothing.
Well, the concern is, and from what the description that's been provided, is that it seems to be a compilation of what agencies are doing and
Yes.
their interpretation of what they think is important in relation to the activities the Delta Plan is laid out as needing to move forward. I would refer, and I would actually endorse and share the comments that Councilman Johnston made about, and actually you alluded to in terms of your conference in Atlanta. Who is setting the priorities for the activities?
So you'd like us to?
The document says, at one point says, it, meaning the document, the agenda, interim agenda, will identify Delta-wide science needs. Okay, that's a perspective that's coming from the agencies. Or it could provide management relevant guidance, which is also wording that's in the document. Management relevance is very important. And we've talked about this in the past with you, and you've talked about it in development of the science plan and One Delta, One Science, as getting this scientific activity that's going on, multiple areas, lots of money, focused on those things that are going to help better manage the Delta and pursue the objectives of the Delta Plan. And it's unclear that that's what this is, if that's what it is. And so this goes also to what's going to be presented to and what's the role of the implementation committee, and we've talked about that before as well. Our understanding was the idea was to put together a program, an effort to, you have to start with compilation, there's no question, you got to know what everybody's doing, understood. But then the question is, what are the priorities? Is the work that's being done matching the priorities? And while, yes, there's a lot of activity done in various agencies that is in response to mandates from the legislature that says we want you to study this, the question for the next round of mandates is, are the current mandates the right ones? Should the mandates change? Should there be other things going on? And so the real question becomes then, is the process that's moving into the implementation committee and then ultimately development of the science plan itself going to reflect priorities that make sense, not for the agencies necessarily, but for the policymakers that need that science to make good decisions, which all of you and others, and particularly the implementation committee, I think was designed to try to get at. So that was the only question about, you know, what this was or wasn't and where it's headed. And so I just wanted to put that on the table as to think about going forward. And again, as Councilman Johnston mentioned, you know, is it what the policymakers need, or is it what the agencies think the policymakers need because that's what they're doing, or whatever, and just need to deal with that issue. Specifically in this document, a question that we had, there's two, is in terms of specifics, talking about a priority science need or what have you for looking at water use efficiency, and I thought there were two right up front. There was a water use efficiency and another in terms of water conservation. Certainly very important, certainly related to objectives of the Delta Plan and state policy, but is it really a scientific issue that's not being dealt with in many other forums? Similarly, the issues related to Delta's place in terms of the economy and tourism and things like that. Again, we support that activity. It's been directed to the Conservancy and to the Delta Protection Commission to work on those items. Just not sure that's really appropriate in the Delta Science Plan context of One Delta, One Science. Again, not terribly controversial. Activities that are undertaken within habitat and other things have a social science and social component, certainly, but that's a little different than, you know, sort of focusing on how to optimize tourism or what have you. Again, which has other forums where that's being pursued. So those two sort of specific subject areas were some question, but overall the issue gets to, is the focus of the agencies identifying what they see as science needs, or is it policy folks, the implementation committee, you folks, identifying what management relevant guidance you need and shaping the science activities from that end of things? So just reaction to the document.
Good. Greg, are you going to provide written comments? Good.
Yes.
That'll be.
And I do, again, I want to compliment the staff for getting all that information together, and there's a lot. And we also appreciate, as we've said throughout this process of the science plan, the outreach that Dr. Goodwin and the staff have done to our folks, and we're in conversation, and we'll continue that. But just wanted to put this on the record here at the meeting.
Good. It's a work in progress, so your written comments will be helpful. Any other public comments? All right. Then we are on to file item 13, meeting adjourned. Thank you for coming.
Actually, Mr. Chair, can I just make one comment as my boss is sitting at the back there? I should have also acknowledged with the conference that this is done with a very significant financial support of the USGS, as well as a lot of logistical support in the organization. So I was very remiss, and thanks, Rainer, for pointing that out.
Okay, great. Thanks, Peter. Thank you all very much for coming.